is I'm just going to put my phone on charge so that it doesn't pop out at any time. Just before we start.
I've got a top tip for you for your next one you do.
Go on.
Start recording the moment the call begins and never do an introduction. Just start talking and then just allow it to become the thing you're going to use. I tell you what, I got that actually from Joe Rogan. That's how he does it.
So he just starts talking. He doesn't.
Yeah, from the moment the person is in the room, the everything's rolling, and then at some point when they begin, they then just do the edit there. It's a much better way because everyone's then completely natural, and you don't have this. Hi, Andy. Hi, Alan. How are you?
I know,
I'm good. Thank. Oh, for fuck's sake! The amount every fucking NLP that does an interview, it always begins with that sort of stilted, trying to get somewhere.
Well, do you know what? Because after we started to speak, I sort of started to think, right, internal, there was a drum roll, like I need to start building up for the big intro. So let's just kick off.
And I recommend as well I say this to coaches and therapists, if you're doing client sessions too, they have this notion like, here we are having a conversation. Okay, and now we're going to begin the session. And they just change the entire frame and paradigm. Why do people do that? Why do coaches and therapists have this notion they have to paradigm absolutely every interaction as a therapeutic interaction or a not therapeutic interaction? And I know why. Because now I'm charging you for my wisdom. That's what it comes down to. And it's ridiculous. So you take the frames away from human interactions, and that way you've now got two human beings having a conversation. Difficult concept for a lot of them, I know.
Well, but there's the thing that they won't have a chance to do the creepy hypnotist voice.
Yeah, the creepy hypnotist voice is quite important. But again, that can be incrementally introduced throughout the session. It doesn't have to be done as, okay, and now I'm going to begin the hypnosis. So if you'd like to put your feet flat on the floor and close it, that has a place. It does have a place because for some people, that's the expectation they require. But if we look at people like Erickson, if you look at people like Bandler, actually, not like when they're teaching, because obviously you have to teach people the steps to do. But when they're actually doing the work, they don't do any of that stuff. They just get on with it in the middle of the conversation they're having, because the conversation is the conversation.
I guess they don't feel the need to create a separate frame for it. It's interesting, like some clients, over the years, I sort of found that I would be doing what I thought was fairly decent work and quite a naturalistic trance if I was doing anything with trance. And then I'd go, okay, right, let's stop and let's do some hypnosis now or something like that. And so the person's like, it's really jarring and brought out of whatever sort of, like a state they're in. And like, okay, right, now we're going to go through the formal steps. And really, I didn't need to do any of that shit. But I suppose you live and learn. It takes a little bit of experience before you go beyond the very kind of prescriptive methods that certainly in hypnosis you're taught by. I think maybe it's because of the stigma of hypnosis. It's like, well, we have to give you a very, like a bullet by bullet, point by point, structure so that, the person doesn't get trapped in hypnosis or any of that. Absolute bullshit. I'd quite like to see somebody trapped in hypnosis. I think it'd be quite interesting. Not for them, obviously.
Yeah, getting trapped in hypnosis is that kind of notion of mind, notion of the world that a child would have, or somebody who's very, very naive to their own thought processes and very naive to how other people think. So theory of mind is not highly developed. But it is interesting that some coaches and therapists also do retain this notion that they have to be there to be able to undo the suggestion. And you see this on forums as well. If you look on the Reddit hypnosis forum, I've been hypnotized 20 years ago in a therapy session, and I need the suggestions to be undone. And I think, what notion does that individual actually have of mind? And the fact that then lots of people come in with all these techniques and processes by which to do this, it is fascinating. I say people's models of how the brain works, how the mind works. It's like, maybe I'm the anomaly. I mean, it could be.
Well, it's that. I remember seeing a little sort of really sketchy, and I mean sketchy, sort of little cartoon, and it was one guy standing on his head, and everyone was standing on his head, and one person was standing up normally, and all the people that are standing on their head were sort of pointing at the one standing up normally, going, you're doing it wrong or something like that, so I kind of get that. And yeah, it's I just think that maybe it's because that there's this, I don't know whether it's the stigma or the fact that you have to sort of impute some well, this is what I'm charging you for, this is the big kind of like theatrical, where I turn into Rasputin or whatever. I don't know, maybe it's that. So today I wanted to talk to you and talk with you about quite a few things. So I must have known you about 12 years, I reckon. And that was, so my first interactions of you were on NLP Connections. Remember the good old days?
The good old days.
Yeah, the Wild West. And obviously I sort of picked up, this guy knows what he's talking about. And this is interesting because some people really don't seem to like what he says. But I found that what you were saying, really kind of spoke to me and kind of made sense. And I suppose because I was sort of following NLP before I actually trained in NLP. And I think because I had almost like not a layman's, but an outsider's view of it, I wasn't indoctrinated. So where you were speaking what seemed to me common sense and logic, maybe, I was like questioning why, the people who were of the cloth were sort of like, no, but that's not the case. And I can't even remember this, some of the arguments are so bloody petty and trivial, but I remember you really, even from the earliest times in our relationship, if I can call it that, that you were not afraid. I think that's the one thing that really was always struck me about you, that you're literally don't give a shit about calling bullshit on anything. And as we get into more of your sort of your personal history around employment and stuff like that, I think it's going to be great for other people to be able to see how you're more than happy to sort of point the finger at almost like a whole therapeutic paradigm, certainly in psychiatry and some of those kind of things. And what I'm genuinely interested in, how did you grow the bollocks like space hoppers enough that you could go, this is illogical, I think that's bullshit, so that's one of the things that I'm certainly looking forward to hearing. But so I first saw you in NLP Connections, and then you started running the IEMT experimental workshops, and I thought, I'll have a bit of this. And I think I was saving up for my NLP practitioner, which I think cost me about $1,500 or maybe just under $1,000, which I thought was a fucking lot of money back then, and it probably was. So I think you had a thing where for £49 you could come and do this experimental workshop, whatever. And I remember going with a certain individual, a woman that I'd met through NLP Connections, a really nice lady, and we went, and I was blown away by the material that you were sort of presenting there, which obviously then later went on through a couple of iterations to become IEMT, and I was just, before it was the day before I started my NLP training, and so I was kind of, I'd read about the techniques and all the rest of it, but to actually sort of see the effect, the impact of something that seemed so almost trivial, and I still, stick to that about the actual mechanics of IMT, is they're almost trivial and so throwaway, and yet, my God, like massive shifts that they created in people. But I must say, it was quite entertaining for me that you made my friend cry. I don't know if you remember that.
I do, because at the end, it was one of those awkward moments. I learned a lesson in that particular experimental workshop. The lesson was never do a demo in the last half an hour before the end of the day, Because if it all goes to shit and all goes wrong, what do you do? And of course, we'll finish at 5 o'clock and 5:15. I'm still there at the front trying to deal with the emotional catastrophe that has emerged. 5:30 comes and people are one by one getting up and going, thanks, Andy. Yeah, we'll see you next time. And it ended up with, I think it was just the three of us in the room and everyone else left. And what it was, an hour and a half overtime to try and deal. Yeah, lesson in life.
It was
don't make them cry at the end of the workshop.
Yeah, it was pretty awkward, but yeah, I mean, that went, and then the following day I started my NLP training, and I really enjoyed that. But what struck me, and I don't want to talk about this too much, but it's kind of on my mind, so I'm going to put it out there. What I was fascinated by the fact that some people, because I came to NLP and hypnosis and IMT to learn the skills, I thought, God, if I learn those skills, I'll be able to have an impact and, you know, do some, I guess, and do some good, and you know, and quite transparently, I thought that'd be great for my ego and great for other people. So there's a transaction. It's not like, oh no, I'm doing it all for the children or anything like that. It's like, I'll feel great about myself if I can help other people, and I still do, and I still, you know, I do thrive off that. The idea, you know, if I can help someone, that's fantastic. But what I noticed was that a load of people that go in to learn a therapeutic, to learn the intervention, are actually going there for sort of, well, some are going for entertainment, and some are going for, or edutainment maybe, and some of them are actually going there to sort of seek therapy. And just the idea of, okay, so let's look at this. You're going for therapy in a setting where people don't know the therapy, and you're going to trust your psyche and your fragile psyche and in the hands of people who probably don't know quite at that point what they're doing. It's just weird, isn't it?
But it's worse than that, because then those emotionally needy, disturbed, mentally unstable individuals, because they've turned up every day, they end up with a practitioner certificate. Now, they may have felt good during the week. They may not have had the therapeutic change that's going to change the way they live their lives, but they've now got a practitioner certificate that will change the way they live their lives, because now they're going to start going out there with a change of identity that says, I'm not a person who's a patient. I'm not mentally ill. I don't have emotional problems. I'm doing personal development. And I've done my personal development, and I've got a practitioner certificate, which now means I'm elevated in my status, but most of them will still have the emotional, psychological problems that they had before. And now they're out there, they'll set up websites, they'll post voluminously on social media these days, or back then on the various forums that existed. And before you know it, they start to garner some credibility that they are some kind of practitioner. And they're not, they're a mess. But of course, no one portrays themselves in their public face, especially on the internet, where we can highly filter and Photoshop every aspect of our lives to be the perfection. And then the money starts coming in, and some of them actually do see clients. And and you and I share a number of people we know who I know are actually Munchausen's. They are faking their entire life, and their whole life has been one of fakery. And a very, very good place to hide is a place where there's no objectivity. Because the therapies, the soft sciences, have no objective reality, because everything is subjective. It's not like I can pretend to be a chemist, I can pretend to be a physicist or an economist, because there are objective measurements by which we can prove whether that person's real or not. In therapy and personal development, you get them all, from the narcissists through to the mentally ill, through to the unstable. And some of those people actually break through to presenting themselves now to be the face of the field. It's really disturbing. And of course, it's the thing no one likes to talk about. I do, and it's why they don't like me.
Yeah, I remember I did some work with victim support. It's voluntary work, whatever. And just thought I'd get that in there, subliminal messages. I'm a good guy. But so I was doing some work with victim support, and on the training course, oh my God. So we did it's like a couple of days, I think, up in the center of London. It was plush offices. And there was a woman on the training course, and she was training to be a counselor. And counseling certainly has its place. I know I've got dear friends of mine that when we've lost friends through suicide and stuff like that, they've actually gone for counselling, and other people that I know that have gone to counselling and they've got some good stuff out of it. However, this woman on this training course, she seemed to be the worryingly sort of maladjusted, and it was like, you know, those people that they're actually like got goldfish eyes and they've got like 1,000-yard stare. And she was kind of like, she was like, oh, you know, we can do some work together if you want. And I was just like, yeah. But then this reached a crescendo when in the training for victim support, they show a counselling session between a guy who was out one Christmas Eve or on his birthday, and he was jumped by a bunch of people, and these lads, they gave him a good kicking and they were stamping on his face and all sorts of that happy mess. And I was just like horrified that the I don't know if it's a psychotherapist or the counselor, he was basically revivifying the traumatic event, getting the person to relive the event, and the person in the hope that salt and light and air, a little bit of air, get a bit of air on it, would kind of like fix the problem. But from what I saw, it was just basically almost like, you know, re-traumatizing, consolidating that trauma. And I'm not saying it's like that for all the times, but I was absolutely horrified at that, at the use of the model in that way.
Well, one of the difficulties is that so many coaches and therapists across all the alphabet therapies, and also within orthodox mental health as well, I mean, they're not exempt from my contempt for what I see people doing. What they're doing largely is repeating the phrases and the ways of being that give them the identity of that particular role. So a mental health nurse will act and talk in a particular way. They will use certain buzz phrases and cliches when they are doing that. A counselor will use certain buzz phrases and cliches when they're doing that, and certain tones of voice. We've seen the people trying to do an impression of Milton Erickson, which is actually they've never seen. They're doing an impression of Richard Bandler doing an impression of Milton Erickson as they try and be an Ericksonian hypnotherapist, having never studied Ericksonian hypnotherapy, but they've done NLP, so they know everything. They're all repeating the stuff that they have learned to do because it gives them a group identity. And I saw this with nurses too when I was a nurse. The worst thing you can do is talk like I do, because this is not how nurses talk. I'm not supposed to be in a clinical setting as a junior level employee in a hierarchy and talk the way I do. It's why no one ever liked me. It's why I was so unpopular in places, because I didn't fulfill the identity role that you're supposed to have when you wear this cliched uniform of whatever the role we're doing. What they're not paying attention to is what the hell is going on in the mind of the client they're talking to. Doing the job is more important than the results the job gets. And I saw this in hospitals. Why do the nurses do that? Because that's what we do here. And if I don't do those things myself, then I'm going to be criticized and held to account by my colleagues and somehow be an aberration or be lazy. So people naturally fall into line and do what everyone else does. It's the same with counselors. It's the same with hypnotherapists and practitioners of every alphabet therapy. And it's really frustrating for me to see. And when I call it out, of course, the people I call out have fans. And just going back to the one particular Munchausen's patient that I know has given herself some degree of status within the alphabet therapy community. If I were to name her, that would end my career in every possible way, because this person has supporters. She has fans. She has people who think she's really nice. They think they've never met her. I know they've never met her, but because they're connected on social media, there's a sense of familiarity. Now, when I come along and say something truthful about those individuals, not only do I immediately get a legal threat come back at me, and the person says, "Oh, I'm suing Andrew Diosdin because he's such a," with this defamation, counter accusations come back. And then all the minions who are the supporters who believe that person and think I'm the bully because I'm the one speaking out of turn. It's amazing the backlash that they then get. I've just got to share this one because you mentioned NLP connections earlier.
Yeah.
And why did I get the reactions from NLP Connections people that I used to get? Well, there were a number of reasons. One was I spoiled the party. And I never really, I called people out on some of the nonsense and would provide counter views and supportive arguments. I never really derided an individual. I would pick on particular points of technical points that people didn't like. But here's the thing: I used to post regularly with sock puppets, fake accounts, sorry, on NLP Connections. And if you ask anyone from those days, they'll tell you I used to do that. I never did that. But they will tell you, because the two people I used to pretend to be are John Baker and Chris O'Donnell. And people used to think that John and Chris were me as sock puppets. Because John has the same, used to live just up the road here.
I met him, he's a great guy.
Interests as me, and the same knowledge of neurology as I do, because we are both from the same cloth in terms of that material. So we used to have very similar things we'd post about. Chris has the same clinical background that I do. And so he would post on the mental health stuff. He's also done all the NLP stuff and all the rest. People used to say I was those two people. And it does not matter if you show them the evidence. Well, he posted with sock puppets. Everyone knows that. Okay, show me the evidence, because maybe I was drugged and don't remember.
Yeah,
and so now that becomes a legacy. See, that becomes a legacy. So now I'm like the Scarlet Pimpernel, because when other people are critical, oh, that's Andrew T. Austin doing that. He's under one of his fake accounts again. Really? So I will make a confession, though.
Go on.
I will make a confession. I did create a fake account. It never, ever, I never posted from this account. I took a fairly arbitrary, reasonably good-looking young woman's photo from a dating site, from a foreign country. And I created a profile, and I just stuck it on there. And I never posted from that account once, never.
I didn't send you pictures from that account, did I?
Well, so I just left it sitting there. This was on NLP Connections, and I left it sitting there because I thought, let's just see. I'm just curious if I put out a little bit of bait, what comes back. I got one or two little messages, oh, like your profile. I'm really, it looks like we have common interests, blah, blah, blah. It was just all guys. And I get it. Single guys are chancing their arm, but it's polite little messages. I took nothing there. But I did manage to get a message from a certain person who shall go unnamed, and I can't give any reference to them at all. A certain person in the, let's just say, big league, who was on their way over to the country to come and attend on a particular event. And despite this person being married and having just had a child, and which they used to post about voluminously, was really keen to meet up. And I thought, interesting. It was like to meet up, nudge. I'd like to show you around, and it was like, okay, that's interesting. They're not married anymore.
Oh right, yeah. So yeah,
but that was the only sock puppet account that I ever had, and that was the only. And I never replied to that person, and I never did anything with that particular account.
So getting back to what you were saying about calling people out, like, how did you learn to do that? Because, like, were you born with a pair of brass bollocks on you? Like, no. Is it like, I can only imagine that it's like almost like it's obviously it's the sort of non-conformist kind of thing, but also it's almost like you're not buying into the group thing. And so how did you learn? Is that something that you were born with, or that you cultivated?
It happened in a single moment. And I think I put this story in my book, The Rainbow Machine, available in all good bookshops.
Yay.
And it was up until really 18, 19 years old, I was never really contentious. I was troubled. I had a lot of emotional difficulties, a lot of emotional turmoil. But I was troubled, but I was always very timid and very scared of authority figures. I was very much in that kind of subservient, subjugated kind of mindset. When I was a student nurse, I think I was a first year, and I was on a unit where basically this guy was dying. He was going to die pretty much within the hours, the same day. Beautiful summer's day. and he wanted to be wheeled outside into the grounds of the hospital. There was no gardens or anything. Basically, there was a tree outside the window, and he wanted to be wheeled out there to go and die outside under the tree in nature.
Wow.
And so I didn't even hesitate. I mean, I didn't know what I'm not allowed to do. I've got the naivety of youth. So I went, all right. We started wheeling him out, and management of the unit got really angry with me, and I was told to put him back. But he wanted to go out and do that, and I was told to put him back, and they put him back. And I was then disciplined for that action, and I was held out to be some kind of freak, some kind of joke, some kind of moron. Because what kind of moron does that sort of thing? And something in my head snapped. It would be fair to say, and a monster was born in that moment. Now, it took me years to learn how to curtail the emotional outrage that would come when I would see those things. And over the next few years, it took quite a big cost on me, because those sort of things are standard in hospitals. Every clinical environment you go in, you're going to find things that just defy all humanity. And there are so many things. I could go off on a tirade about all of the sort of the medical injustices that are actually framed and sold to the public as being really sensible and healthy, and this is a goodness, and it's not. It's a terrible thing that's being perpetrated. Because I started to see those things every single day, I couldn't, and the emotional energy that I had because of all the turmoil, a monster was born. And then over the years, once I then finished working clinically and I started to sort myself out, I started to find much better ways of directionalizing and channeling that energy into something more productive. I think I was probably quite destructive, not constructive, when I was working in clinical environments. The only regret I have is I didn't do more. I should have made a lot more noise, been a lot more of a nuisance. But of course, when your income is dependent on the very, basically don't bite the hand that feeds. There's only so far one can push things before they're unemployable. And that's pretty much where I put myself. And so I had no choice then but to go self-employed over time.
So what would that have looked like? What would the process of you learning to control that, bloody indignation, like, almost like taming the wild stallion, kind of. What would? Can you just? I mean, it's hard for you to say because obviously you're talking about yourself, but like, how do you think that you manage? Like, what were the sort of like the mechanisms that you use in order to try?
Part of it will start the self-analysis and working on my own emotional intensities. You see, negativistic emotions are very energizing. And most emotions can be reactive emotions. So we react to things and they have a great intensity. They can be fairly neutral emotions. They're not reactive, but they're not proactive. And then some emotions are highly proactive. So they promote you to do certain things. And it was largely for me coming out of all of the reactive states, because I learned that when I got into a reactive state and got angry, I would also get upset. And then when I get upset and I get angry, then I start to become less articulate. And when I'm less articulate, I start shouting quite a lot and swearing quite a bit, which doesn't work very well in team meetings. And it certainly doesn't work well when you're called into the manager's office for a quiet word. And the manager is then met with this massive tirade of abuse from 22-year-old Andy. It just doesn't go down very well with the management hierarchy. So over time, with enough feedback, I started to realize that if I'm going to carry on, I need to do something better. And I've got to learn, okay, I can see what's wrong. That's all well and good. Identifying what's wrong is easy. Protest is really easy. And I always think this about the protests I see when they start throwing things at the police. So, okay, so how's that a protest then when you get into fights with police officers? When people talk about overthrowing the government and fighting the government with guns, what that actually equates to is shooting police officers, because that's what it looks like. That's actually what ends up happening. That doesn't seem like anything that's constructive or in any way useful to anybody. It's just wholesale negative. I started to recognize those patterns in that I was fighting the wrong people, because, okay, I could attack this particular individual. There's millions more out there. And once I've attacked them and said my bit, they're not going to go, oh, you know what, Andy, you're absolutely right. Do you know, I've listened to your emotional tirade and I see your point of view now, and you've changed my entire reality. And I'm going to reorganize how this department runs. And I'm going to make sure everyone coming through, that never happened. That doesn't happen. So I realized, okay, I've got to attack the ideologies that govern these things as opposed to particular individuals. And that was a slow process to learn. But also I had to then get training for myself, and I had to get greater input from people. I had to learn greater wisdoms from outside of the areas in which I was working to broaden my own mindset and have greater resources. So it was a slow process. But I think the other one is really simple. I just got older, and growing up certainly does calm one down. And most of us can relate to that. The emotional intensities of teenage years and early 20s compared to what now are late 40s and 50s, things do calm down a bit just by getting older. So that helps too. But I think experience as well. After, like, I think I was dismissed from employment 11 times, plus or minus a few. So yeah, after a while, I start to think, it's not working. This is not working. And of course, my own well-being, my own welfare and mental and emotional health also wasn't working so good. So yeah, I need to sort me out first.
So when you were say going through that process, and you were kind of you're sort of wrestling with the monster, so to speak, and maybe having a couple of outbursts and getting dismissed from a post because because you thought certain thing was wrong and blah blah blah. What impact did that have on you? Like, because I'm listening to you and I'm like thinking, God, man, I think I would have been in bits. If I'd have been like sacked 11 times, I just would have been in absolute bits. Like, how did you sort of turn that around?
Well, there's a narcissistic trait about. And I got this actually recently from Sam Vaknin, who runs a fantastic YouTube channel. And anyone who's not come across Sam Vaknin's work, just watch every single video he's produced. It'll take you years to do. But something I learned recently is that one of the narcissistic traits, and I recognized looking back on myself then, I was very high in narcissistic traits. I was very low in psychopathy. I was way too anxious to ever be a psychopath, and way too guilt-laden as well. But I clearly would have scored very highly on narcissistic traits. But one of them is they accept their punishment. They accept that when they are doing the stuff that they do, the victim position is already inbuilt into that. And that actually, when I saw Vaknin's lecture on that particular thing, I thought, my God, he's talking about me, because that was how I was. It was when I'm going into a unit and I can see this stuff going on, I know what's going to happen way before it even starts. I didn't have to do the sequences that I then engaged in, but I always knew that was going to happen next. But there was other elements too, and there are people to whom I'll never know their names. I don't remember most of them, but there were plenty of people who agreed and supported me. And I had, within management and clinical hierarchies, I had supporters who bailed me out on a number of occasions. And that was always very reassuring. They weren't able to ever do anything publicly. So, for example, when I first qualified, the health authority in which I was first working, within 3 months of working there, I was actually not just dismissed from my employment, but I was dismissed from the health authority. I was given a ban from ever working in any aspect of that sector. I think it was a 10-year ban or something. It may not have been that long. And so I had no choice now. If I'm going to work clinically, and I've only just qualified, what do I do? Now, interestingly, as I'm in the this is the first time it's happened to me. And there's a little thing in the newspaper too, the local paper. Oh my God, it's just terrible. And of course, the rumor mill gives a very different story to what actually happened. I got a phone call from a lead clinical manager from another health authority to say, I've heard about you. And I said, really? I don't know what to say. I was just in a meeting where you were being discussed and they were gathering further data on you to bring a prosecution. Oh my God. She said, I don't like what I'm hearing. And I would like to offer you a job. And I started the following week in a different health authority. So I literally, in those next few days, packed up my stuff and I moved. And that's how I ended up where I started then working. And unfortunately, I never saw that manager again. I knew her name through a number of years. She developed a brain tumor and was off work by the time I actually started on her unit. And so I never saw her again. But that rescued me initially from quite a difficult patch.
Yeah.
And then later on, of course, as I'm getting a lot more vocal, I had a lot of supporters who did protect me or offer me alternative employment. So that was useful. And I don't think everyone would get that lucky. I'm quite, still looking back, I'm quite surprised I was that lucky.
So interesting you said, talking about narcissistic traits, and I think we might have even had this discussion recently, because obviously I've been looking at some of Vaknin's work, and it is bloody brilliant. And it was the idea that, because I always felt like quite uneasy watching some of his videos, because I was like, ugh, I felt like I recognized that within myself. Yeah. I think we had a discussion, and maybe we can talk about this for a minute, that there's a difference between being a narcissist and having narcissistic traits, and that kind of thing. So could you just expand it, because you probably put it better than I would, because I've looked at some of the work, I thought, oh, shit, does this mean, my God, I'm a narcissist? But in a lot of many areas of my life, I'm like normal or functional or whatever, but there are a couple of things, and when you hear them, when I initially heard them, it almost made me like, I want to put that down. I didn't want to watch it because it made me feel uncomfortable. But just talking about the difference between having the traits and actually being a dyed-in-the-wool narcissist.
So the narcissist is just doing more of certain behaviors that everyone does and less of other behaviors that everyone does. So they have everything maxed out and often beyond certain thresholds. They're not some freak of nature that is completely different to everyone else. They've just got, everyone has different traits, tendencies of what you do more of in one thing and maybe less of in something else, but across all of the human spectrum. So there's nothing in a narcissist that isn't in everybody else. It's just the extent by which you do it. And there'll be some relationships we've had, there'll be some things we've done, there'll be periods of times of our life where we can look back and go, oh, my trait bias in the narcissistic trait bias were off the charts in that particular context. But that doesn't mean the person is a narcissist. What Vaknin will suggest is the narcissist is those traits. The difference being, so if I'm dealing with, say, a schizophrenic who's got florid symptoms all over the place, or a profound depressed person they're gone, you can't, essentially what I'm going to try and do is get through the quagmire of the chaos to the person that's on the inside. When we know people, we know well, we can see the mess that they present on the outside that other people see, but we know the person behind behind those traits. What Vaknin suggests is with the narcissist, there isn't anyone behind it. What you're seeing is the extent of what they are. There is nothing else. There is no person to break through and get behind. And that's the mistake people make in their relationships with narcissists. They think there's a person behind that and they can see the real person.
To fix
that's
them.
The error. So they're the primary differences, but it's not that there's anything massively different. So when you listen to any of the lecturers that talk about narcissism, because there's a few others as well, but I think Vaknin is absolutely the most expert that I've come across. He's talking, it sounds like he's talking about you. Or for the person who doesn't have self-insight, it sounds like they're talking about everyone you know. Because actually everything he's talking about is stuff that everybody does. It's just the extent by which people do it.
So I one of the recent videos I saw, and I thought, God, that's just so insightful, was the about victimhood, and it was all about how victims are, it becomes integrated. This idea of being a victim is almost like a badge of honor, which is kind of fairly commonplace. But then they'll use that to manipulate situations so that actually the victims end up not being the victim, because they'll have manipulated the situation. So they'll have won that interchange or that exchange or whatever. And still by wearing this like the cowl of being the victim, that it's almost like it's a form of narcissism, isn't it? It's like if it's fully developed, and I think Bakhtin also talks about how the quite often narcissists have been damaged or wounded at some point in their past. You know, whether that was necessarily by another narc or whatever it was. I can't remember what he says about that, but I thought the whole idea of, you know, like victimhood being, you know, this almost like this toxic identity that people will play out in their lives in order to garner attention and manipulate people's feelings is bloody terrifying, really.
The things to look for when you've got somebody who's assuming the victim position, are they also, is it victim position combined with moral superiority? And that is the classic narcissistic game. So whenever they don't get what they want, they immediately make themselves the victim of you, and that's when the counter accusations come in. And of course, the narcissist will accuse their target of everything they themselves are doing. And if they get in there first, and I've got personal experience of being on the receiving end of this, if they get in there first, it's very, very hard now to actually say that's not true. Because the viewers, the third parties to this drama, they don't know what's going on, and whoever gets the accusation in first is the one who feels they got the upper hand. Combined with moral superiority as well, it is quite remarkable. It is fascinating to watch.
It's really weird how I think maybe last year before, the buzzword was in sort of pop psychology was gaslighting, and kind of this year it's narcissism and stuff like that, and it's just like, well, these concepts have actually been around a bloody long time. Like, why are they only sort of blossoming now? Is it something to do with social media? I kind of think it might be. Yeah,
but the therapy communities move in with fashion. So I'm fairly convinced the gaslighting thing that became very popular. It was being talked about in clinical psychology. It became a bit of a fashion trend there. But in the sort of the personal development NLP type world, you had individuals like Richard Grannon, who's worked with Sam Bakhtin. Now, he's quite a charismatic speaker, and I've really enjoyed his YouTube channel. And because he's into the domain of the personal development scene, because that's, you know, one of his areas of background, there was a way in to it made that work accessible to people within the personal development scene. Because they're on YouTube, on social media, and we see this guy, he's quite charismatic, he's talking about these things, and so everyone likes to jump on the bandwagon. I mean, you remember when it was mirror neurons, everyone was talking about mirror neurons. Everyone, I mean, back in the 90s, it was always the amygdala. Do you remember the drama triangle from a few years ago? Everyone went into the drama triangle. Therapists love to move with the fashion trend, and they're immediately the expert in it. And most of the time, they demonstrate they know absolutely nothing at all. But that doesn't matter to them, because they're demonstrating that I am an enlightened coach, because the superficiality, the lack of depth into the knowledge and the personal relationships the individual has is another classic trait of the narcissistic personality. They don't have depth of knowledge, they don't have depth of anything, and their emotions are pretty shallow too, which is why they flit from one thing to another. I saw people on Facebook when the clapping for carers was a big thing over here. They were like putting up videos of their neighborhood where everyone's out the windows clapping. Isn't it a beautiful thing? 2 weeks later, who are these idiots? They should be giving them a pay rise, not clapping for them. And they flip around because the fashion trend shifted somewhere else, and then they all jump on that. But they've forgotten the posts from 2 weeks ago were giving the exact opposite. Superficial, lack of continuity, another narcissistic trait. No continuity to relationship, which is why you have to build rapport with them every time you meet them. And on it goes.
So on social media, you recently took the steps to, I would say radical steps, but actually I don't think they're that radical. They're probably fairly common sense, of where you basically retreated from, or didn't retreat, but just deleted Facebook, deleted social media other than YouTube, which obviously you're using as a platform to create content. Do you want to just talk about that? Because on my I go on my runs, and and I often sort of like churn things over, and I just thought, like, oh, you know, it's like less and less I'm edging towards that kind of like that where I'm lacking engagement with some of those things, because I actually started to find that my own mental health was suffering when I lost my dog, and obviously I did find her, but I then became, you know, quite involved in sharing lots of posts, and even on Christmas, you know, I was out actually physically looking for a dog, and it's something that if I'm available in the area, I'll always do. But I found that entrenching myself to the degree that I was, it was actually starting to affect my well-being. And I was like, fucking hell, I'm like tearing up and crying, like getting super upset about this. I need to kind of withdraw from it. And then there was this guilt that I was like, well, but you know, you're not, you've got a job to do. There was a whole dynamic there. It was quite interesting. But so, and for some people, so where I'm sort of veering towards that, and I know obviously you've gone the whole hog and you've like, you know, powered down on a lot of those things, but for some people that would be almost like an impossible wrench. Like it's become so tightly woven into right, coffee, Facebook. You know, it's a thing. It's like a real societal, well, not paradigm, that's maybe too, but it's certainly a strong frame that a lot of people, they get into, if they work in an office, they'll get into work, have a cup of coffee, check Facebook, and then they'll start it. Like, how did that happen? And you know,
by
what
incrementally, by very slow increments, that happened. It didn't happen
insidiously.
Overnight. It was a gradual process.
Yeah.
Here's what happened for me. It was a perfect storm of different events. So I was becoming aware that I was addicted to social media, that if I went without it, I started to like, it was, I've not looked for 10 minutes. When I'd find myself on a beautiful summer's morning, the sunrise is coming up, it's a beautiful summer's morning, and I'm walking the dogs on the beach. And what am I doing? I'm locked into the infinite scroll. And that is the infinite scroll was the final step that got everybody in. Because there's no social cue to say, okay, you've reached the end now. By making the infinite scroll, I discovered that people's screen time increased exponentially. It was insane. So I was increasingly aware of my own personal addiction. I was also becoming increasingly aware that my ability to concentrate was gone. I had a 10-second memory, if that. I didn't read books anymore, didn't read anything. I was convincing myself that I was learning stuff by looking on Facebook. And essentially, I started to feel my brain rotting. I became aware there's something has changed in me, in my motivations, how I think, how I reason, my animation, everything about me was different. And it was because I'm locked into the infinite scroll of superficial thing. So then I started to examine, what am I doing? Why? How am I justifying this to myself? And the way I was justifying it was, this is a business requirement, because this is how I promote my work. I'm actually only on social media. I had a good following. I used to get very high levels of engagement with my posting. And so it's a business model. And so there was a number of things happened. So I then put in all sorts of tracking agencies on all of my websites. So I could monitor where the money is coming from, where my work is coming from, where my online sales and where my booking for client work is coming from. I could track what web pages are people looking at, how they're looking. I did complete data analysis, I think, for 2 or 3 months. Now, as that data started coming in, and I couldn't mistake the fact that 80% easily, 80+% of my time was spent on social media, less than, I'm trying to remember now, I don't have the exact, this is figurative, less than say 5% of all income and traffic was coming from social media. And that's appalling, especially when I'm also spending quite a lot of money on social media advertising. And I couldn't see any justification for continuing that expense. It wasn't carrying across at all. So that was happening in the background. Then the film, The Social Dilemma, that came out, and lots of people were talking about that, and I hadn't seen it yet. And I watched it, and I was like, okay, this tells me I need to delete. And then the next day, or actually this might be the other way around, there was the incident where I made a comment on a post. It's like, what am I doing? I don't even know this person. It's on a local forum. I make a very derogatory and quite quite nasty comment on somebody's post that what they were doing was a scam, they've been scammed, don't be so fucking stupid, all that kind of stuff. And the next thing I know, this has cut across into the real world. Because I thought this person would be miles away. No, they're just up the road. Amazing. And he's big, he's scary, he's Scottish, and he's really, really angry. Really, really angry. And so is his other half. And oh my God. So essentially, I then spend 3 days hiding. This is where it gets to the theatre of the upset. Laura was so angry. I was so angry. So, what have you done? It's like, oh, gone too far. And of course, those 3 days, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to deal with him. I'm going to have to deal with him. But there's no point in dealing with him until he's calmed down a bit, because I value my face, my beautiful face.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And essentially what I did was, the last act before deleting all of my social media was to message this guy, have quite a lengthy conversation with him, offer profuse apologies. And I told him what had happened to me. So the reality is, this has actually come as a useful experience for me, because it's made me wake up. If he hadn't have done that, I would probably have found excuses to carry on the social media. But those 3 days of being slightly afraid certainly, actually more slightly, certainly did solidify the decision in my head, and complete introspection and reevaluation of what have I been doing for the last 4 years. You know, what have I been doing? It locked into the infinite scroll, and my last act was to talk to him remotely through Met, not in real life, and then tell him I'm now deleting everything, and that's exactly what I did. And I will never reanimate it, because the cost on the brain rot it brings is too high.
Do you think so?
And so people think I'm very brave for doing that. Oh, how can you live without it? Well, just like somebody who's addicted to any addictive drug, they can't imagine life without the drug. Yet there was a time they didn't take it. And I, you know, like, I don't drink alcohol. I used to drink a lot of alcohol. I don't drink alcohol at all now. And that was one of the things I learned. I went and did the Alan Carr easy way to stop drinking thing. Brilliant, by the way, absolutely brilliant. Alan Carr's Stop Smoking, Stop Drinking. Not the books. Go and do their one-day event. Because within the hour of being there, I knew I was never going to drink again, because the stuff they said was so obvious. I just never thought it before. And I can apply the same logic from that they taught on the alcohol course to social media. People think that they need it in their lives, but there was a time they didn't have it, and their life was better.
So like, sort of hearing you speak, you know, like, it came to there was a crescendo where, you know, it was like, oh my God, this has gone from the virtual, you know, overlapping into the real ones, like, you know, scary Scottish men, you know, that have got big muscles and own swords, you know, are knocking at my door and stuff like that. And but so that's almost like a massive pain point, if you like. But before that, you spoke about this growing sense of awareness of addiction and stuff like that, and brain rot and stuff like that. And like, do you think we all have that sense of awareness? Because you spoke about introspection as well. Like, are there any kind of, like, I suppose, insights that you can give about how to have introspection without it becoming some sort of negative, bloody spiral of, you know, self-deprecation?
I don't know, because the evidence to my sense is that most of these training programs that are designed to give you personal freedom and all the rest of it, most of them fail. Because look at the adherence to those systems. They're just enslaved by something else. And people one of the things these social media companies offer is the same thing that the drugs offer. They soothe. They reduce anxiety. They make you feel that you've got a companion. They make you feel better about yourself. And largely that's what people would rather do than face the darkness of themselves. And I think this is why the social media companies have fostered narcissism or expressed narcissism. Doesn't mean the individuals are actually narcissistic, but what they're expressing is narcissistic, because the photoshopping of your own reality. You know, one day, may your life be as great as you pretend it is on your social media accounts. And that kind of thing is fostered, and because now my public face, my self-image to everyone else is perfected. They never actually see me in real life, because here I am in my living room, here I am in my bedroom, and they never get to see the real me. I'm soothed because my public image, my projection of self, is better than I'm actually able to achieve in real life. How many people in social situations, to soothe themselves, they try and show their best side. They try and show their perfected side. They don't show their genuine nature, their true nature. Social media allows us to take that even further to its logical conclusion, which is, here is a completely airbrushed reality, and that's the self I want to project. So what advice would I give people who are trying to better themselves? Stop lying. Just tell the truth about who you really are to yourself. And a lot of people can't handle the truth. Just to steal the line, they can't handle it, because to acknowledge the truth themselves has to be to acknowledge they're not the greatness they have pretended to be. Now here's the problem. So I've built up a persona all these years. How do I now tell everyone that was all a lie? And here is who I really am. Well, don't bother telling anyone. Just stop maintaining it. Just stop maintaining persona, and start now just being honest. You don't have to do this kind of, I've been lying about who I am, because everyone else is too. Everyone's lying. Everyone's got this persona the whole time. The trick is to drop the persona, drop the bullshit, drop the narcissistic traits, and actually just be who you really are, and stop projecting yourself to everybody. For a lot of people, they would instantly be plunged into a world of loneliness.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying, because we feel like we have friends. So I've got 5,000 friends on Facebook, and I've got 18,000 followers on Twitter. Yeah, have you met any of them? Would you want to meet any of them? Probably not. So they're not friends. They're the illusion of friends that is fostered so carefully by the social media companies, who are constantly split testing. Add a variable to this group of 5 million people, add a different variable to this 5 million people. Who connects and clicks the most? Okay, so that variable gets the most results. Now introduce new variable as we roll that change out across the platform. Constantly split testing for which one creates maximum engagement, because these companies don't want you to have a life of your own. They want you to be fixated on the screen. But just like the alcohol companies who put on the drink responsibly, and they give donations to the alcohol rehabilitation units, these token little things out of their massive profits, they pretend to have a social conscience. They don't. It's not about having a social conscience. It's about getting the money, because it's the attention economy. Well, people don't care. They are quite happy.
It's like the gamble aware. It's like they show like the shiny spinny reels. I like, whoa, like visual kind of candy, like the spinny shiny, and all the lovely animated golden coins, and your tongue is hanging out going, oh, I'd love to have those golden coins. And I think they're appealing to a sort of a childhood element as well in there. And then they go, gamble responsibly. It's just like,
there's another issue. And again, if I just borrow Sam Vaknin's term of the shared fantasy. So the shared fantasy is a reality we agree on that's not actually real, but it's the fantasy we live. And a shared fantasy is always going to emerge in any close relationship between people. And so we all have our different, that's why you get the family madness. You go to that family, they live in a completely different reality to that family. And then you look at your own family's shared reality, it's completely bonkers. It's how people are. The Matrix is a common theme or meme for people, because the Matrix is a really good metaphor for this kind of stuff, which is essentially, if reality has all this suffering built into it and we have the perfect Matrix, why would you want to come and deal with the real cold, hard reality when you have this illusory reality that is just as real in every possible way? Now, what is the superior human experience? To be sat having the infinite scroll barraged with sound bites of information and key headlines and pretty pictures and all the fabricated reality, or sitting under a tree looking out upon a river where you might get bored after 10 minutes? Or you should be outside in the fresh air, as though somehow outside in the fresh air is the superior experience to have. But it isn't. The augmented reality that is served up by technology is the superior, more enjoyable, more fun experience, because we can eliminate all the real world negative things, and the negative things that, say, virtual reality offer or social media offer are illusory, so they can be fun. Here's the problem. Is it actually superior to be on the outside in a green field? Or is it a superior experience to be locked into the infinite scroll? Why is one better than the other? Well, it's not. One is not. Being outside isn't the superior, and it's not necessarily better. But what has the greater long-term cost on the individual? And now just look at some of the individuals who are living their life on social media. Look at some of the values they hold, some of the things they expect. I mean, just look, it's gone now, but parlor.com. So this became the refuge for all the people that were being, all the sort of right of center people. And it doesn't take much now to be labeled an alt-right, fascist, neo-Nazi, whatever. I posted a Jordan Peterson video once. Fascist? Me? Why? It was really good. If you watch the video, I know all about him. He's alt-right. Okay. So all the people that were deplatformed, they all migrated over to Parler, which then became the platform for free speech. Free speech, free speech. They all like to say that. When I joined Parler, because I thought this could be interesting. Oh my goodness. It was just as bad, if not 1,000 times worse, actually. Because now you've got all the people who've gone to these extremes for stuff, and they all think they're right. Just like the crazy liberals all think they're right. Everyone thinks they're right. I don't think that level of craziness would have been seen without social media. But trying to get those people to give up their reality and come out of the matrix into the cold, hard, brutal reality that's not quite as pleasing, with instant gratification, where you have to work at it. People don't want to do that. They enjoy their shared reality that's facilitated by their social media companies. It's very hard for people then to go, well, life is a bit shit. Yeah, I'll go and live. It is quite boring, isn't it? When we haven't got endless screens, life can be, because we've solved the problem of boredom. But now to take that away from people, we return them to elements of boredom.
But it's something that you said there which sort of rang home for me, which is like, because okay, there's fun, but there's also like truth. And the truth is that you actually, while these things are, they're sort of micro stimulating, your brain, with little hits every time you get a notification ding and all the rest of it. Ultimately, you have to eat. Ultimately, you do have to sleep. Ultimately, you do have to, you go to the bathroom. These are real world functions that they haven't fixed how to do that. Unless there's some upgrade where we lobotomize you and we take away your bowel function and all the rest of it. And so that's where they, until people's, well, I suppose this then speaks to, the sort of people integrating technology into themselves, where there is that never-ending feed that they get. And some of the cyberpunk stuff sort of talks about that, but it's this idea of truth, and the way social media is not wanting us to present truth unless it's through them, and I think, the whole thing about truth is like, people say, oh, what's your truth? Well, my truth is this. But then they're using social media to sort of present that, whatever that truth is. And in either way, it's very insidious, the way it is used. Where do you see it going? Where do you see it ending up, the whole social media? Do you think that it will continue to grow?
I think it's short-lived. No, I don't think this is, because I'm not one of these apocalyptic visionaries that everything's going to end. Things are constantly changing in a fashion. Now, technology is always going to be progressing. That much I get. But pay attention to what the kids are doing these days. And they are, one of the things about the youthful mind is, especially when they're slightly rebellious, they don't like being told what to do, and they will hack. They will find what something does and find alternative uses for it. It's a classic thing that the young mind does. It's like, okay, we can find alternative uses for that. What they've done with with social media, what is happening in terms of the commercialization of it. An area that so many adults aren't aware of is twitch.com. Now, this is something I've been looking at quite a lot recently. So where are the young people in terms of this technology? What are they doing? Twitch.com reveals something really, I think, really profound. Look at the most popular streamers. So who are the people who are getting tens, if not hundreds of thousands of followers every time they go online? Most of them are gamers. They are literally individuals just playing a computer game while their screenshot of what they see is being streamed with a camera at them, and they're in the corner and they're just periodically talking. To any adult looking at that, they're going, how would you sit for hours watching that? Where's the entertainment? Others, you get younger people who've got some creative stuff. So a lot of younger musicians are doing stuff. They get a good number of followers on there as well. But they're not doing so much music. They're doing more just chit chat, and nothing of in-depth or anything is happening. And again, the adult can look at that and go, well, why are kids doing that? So we've got recreational spectator sports of computer gaming. How's that different to a football match? There's that element. But also people are ostensibly listening to music or seeing someone who's creative, but they're not really doing anything creative. They're just talking. Here's what they are doing. This is what the kids are doing. It's about connection and companionship. And something, and for me, Twitch and the success of the individuals on Twitch reveals why broadcast media deserves to die. I will have no sympathy for any of the, especially in the UK, any of the broadcasters whose services disappear from lack of funding because they've missed something fundamental. Remember back in the 70s and 80s when people did spend hours and hours on the TV, watching the TV. That was the primary focus that people did before they shifted their focus from that screen to a different screen. The screens just got higher definition and a lot smaller, it seems. The TV was largely live broadcast. You had continuity announcers in between shows, because what might happen is a show might end a minute or two earlier and the next one's not allotted till on the hour, and so there's 2 or 3 minutes of dead space that has to be filled, and you had live continuity announcers who would talk, and people had their favorite continuity announcers. A lot of the daytime shows were live, but weren't the noise. Stay tuned after the break, we have coming on. And this kind of hyper excitable personality who often isn't too articulate, and they're not being selected for their IQ. They're selected for their visual appearance, or whatever political quota they need to fill. To see this for real, whenever the BBC have a disabled person presenting to camera on any of their news shows, you will notice there is always the classic shot where they're talking, the camera pans away and moves around just for a moment, just to let you know they're in a wheelchair. And then they go back to allowing them to continue talking like a normal person. There's something about that. So the agenda of the broadcasters is not about connection. It's about keeping eyes on the screen, keeping the hook, keeping everything dumbed down. You remember the children's programs from the 70s where you had things like Jack and Nori. There were various things where Think of a Number, Johnny Ball's Think of a Number, Zoe Ball's father for the younger viewers here. There was largely grown-ups talking as a grown-up to a child in an instructional way, in an informative way, not noise, everyone run round and scream and keep the noise and pizzazz. Broadcast media is falling into attention, the attention economy. Go to Twitch, that's not what the kids are watching. What they are doing is they're connecting with people where people talk like a normal human being to another person talking like a normal human being. And broadcast media and social media has lost that. It's the attention economy has forgotten something important. And so that's why I think the average age of the user of things like Facebook is going up every year as kids are not signing up for it, and the Asian population are continuing to use it.
It's interesting because I was the other day, I don't know if you've got Sky or any of these kind of like other channels, but there's this one called Yesterday, and it's brilliant because it has the tales of the Roald Dahl's, the tales of the unexpected. Anyway, And it was amazing. It was a really interesting one because it was a story about this he was an art critic, and he had his wife, and his wife was painted by this guy. And the way this guy paints is he gets the woman to stand there nude, and he paints her nude. And then he says, now go and put a camisole on. Then he paints her in a camisole, and so on and so on. And this was kind of like integral part of the story. But what was fascinating was that the actors were all people in their 50s and 60s. And it's like there was like the bitchy woman who wanted to sleep with the art critic. And like, you know, she had like the you know, Avita, and it's like, hang on, she's being sexual, but she's clearly in her mid to late 50s. You just don't see that now. Or if you do, it's like something which is to create a almost like a pariah, something to be a joke. Oh, look, they're being sexual and they're in their more mature years. Where here, you know, if you watch TV now, it's all people in their sort of 20s and 30s, and they're sexy and they're nice looking and all the rest of it. Whereas it was staggering. Like, these were crusty old goats that were talking about their relationship. And it's like, well, you know, and I even noticed that I was like, oh, it's really nice to see people that are old. But I was like, oh, they're kind of talking about sort of sexy stuff, and they're kind of like in their 60s and 50s. And it was like, and it was like this massive contrast of how the media's changed. And it's like, because, you know, it's nature, and it's a fact that a young 20-year-old person is going to look better than a crusty 60-year-old person. That's just, you know, the human condition and of craving, you know, like this sort of some vampiric kind of nature towards youth, and, you know, and all the rest of it. And I just thought, God, that you would never see. Well, maybe you would. I don't know. Maybe it'd be like a subplot in like a soap opera, and, you know, like where the old crusties are kind of having a relationship. But really, it would never take pride of place in a big show that, you know, it was just about old people. It's like, no, like once you're 50 or 60, it's like you can piss off to Saga and, you know, just go on cruises and all the rest of it. It's just like, God, you know, that's how we're, and I don't want to use the phrase, oh, we're being programmed, but, you know, I think there's something to that, because we can't help but be conditioned. If the stimulus is always young people, beautiful people, sexy people, shiny people, made up people, perfectly lit people, how can we not get conditioned by that? You know what I mean?
And you'll see this a lot in if we start sort of penetrating the veil of TV companies, TV shows. In something I was aware of in because I'm a regular visitor to India. In Indian TV, most of the presenters are white. They look Indian, but they're completely white. And a lot of the models in all the fashion shoots you see and all this, they're all white as well. They're white Indians. And I could never understand that. How do they manage to lighten the skin so much? And the advert breaks. Every second advert is for a skin lightening cream of some description, right, which is largely just sunblock. They put lemon in it because it helps. It doesn't really make the skin any fairer. So Indian culture is fixated on basically not being dark. And the lighter you are, the more attractive you are. Well, most of those models and those TV presenters are not Indian. They import them wholesale from Uzbekistan. Because in Uzbekistan, they have very similar physical features, but obviously they have white skin. And so they could be made to look Indian very easily. And these actors will speak with an Indian accent, but they're not from India. And yet that's being marketed to people on every TV network that has the money to be able to import these people, as though this is the aesthetic ideal. In the US, I don't think you'll ever see any female on any TV show in any capacity or movie that has the nose she was born with. No. I think one day in America, a baby will be born and they go, oh, that poor little child, look, he's got a nose. Let's just cut that off.
Yeah.
Literally just cut the nose off at birth. Why not we start there? Because what is it about the nose has to be so tiny, like a little button? It's so cute. Oh, for God's sake. There's this absurdity. You'll never see anyone on British TV that's not Botox to the hilt and heavily made up. You'll never see any female presenter wear the same garment of clothing twice in a lifetime. Yet they will also espouse progressive liberal values around social identities. They will talk about global economic and pollution issues and sustainability. And yet they are filling landfill. The thing about cotton fibers and world pollution is horrendous. And yet they're major contributors to this. because no one ever wears the same item of clothing twice. And that's every TV station in every part of the world. That's insane. And yet this is an important thing that they present. They're all massively made up. They're all, it's everything is fake, whilst they espouse values that say you're okay being you, but hey, look at us. It's absolutely appalling. And people don't think to question these things and switch it off and go and do something else with their lives. People are caught up. It's just like the Matrix. It's a preferred version of reality. And so people are quite happy to share that fantasy. And that's what traps people in it. They enjoy the fantasy, and if we can make the fantasy real, even better. What a fantastic way to live.
So you spoke about India, and I know that you've had a long love affair with India, and I haven't been to. I've been to some areas in Southeast Asia, but I haven't actually been to India. How did that all start for you? And because it's not, I suppose, as a young person, if you're doing a certain trail, or your gap year, it might be something that would have an appeal. But you haven't just done that. You've gone back again and again and again, and you still do, and you've sort of got this relationship with the country that you sort of keep up. Like, what's that all about?
I think when I first went, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to. I see when I talk to Indians and their notion of England, they think of England as we sit around on a lawn being served tea by butlers under a willow tree that's leaning over a lake, and watching people play cricket or bowls on the lawn. But people have this romanticized notion of other countries. I had something similar of India. And I when I first flew there, I arrived in the middle of Mumbai. Although I think it was still Bombay back then, into the middle of the slums, where before they cleared the slums of Mumbai, and oh my God, I'd never seen anything like it. Never. I was like, I had stepped onto an alien planet, and it was absolutely terrifying. I spent 6 weeks there on my first trip, and I was terrified every single day that I was there. And it's one of those weird things, because even though I was completely terrified of everything and everybody, everything made an impression on me. And then as soon as I got home and calmed down, I couldn't wait to go back again. And then actually start exploring it from a much better frame of reference. And the other one, of course, was I hated my job. And I didn't really enjoy the life choices I had made. And rather than being young and stupid, rather than do something about those life choices, because I was always in conflict working at the hospital, I was constantly in conflict. Rather than do something about those life choices, I would regularly run away. Right. And of course, back then, the Indian economy being as it was, £1,000 could last me easily 6 months, maybe longer. So it was very easy to save up my money and then just go. And so in part, it was a runaway. But the other one is it's the colorfulness, the food, the people, the lifestyle. They get a lot right there. There's a lot of problems in the country. Can't deny it, but they've got a lot right.
What was the story? I remember you telling me a story that I'd be in stitches, and it was something about a taxi and a moped. And
I'll tell you a story. I mean, this is for me. This is quite ridiculous, but also it epitomizes so much of the kind of experiences that I'd have there. So I always say to anyone, if you want to have a complete adventure, go to India, and don't go to where all the backpackers go. Don't go and hang out in Goa with all the English sports bars. Don't do that. Go away from where all the tourists go and actually go and meet locals and go with what locals recommend and what you do. You have a totally different experience. Most people go where all the backpackers go and hang out with other backpackers the whole time. Now, I didn't always do that. And I don't even remember where I was now. But I was traveling with a chap, an American guy who was on the same sort of trail that I was going on. And he had gone into the bank to change his traveler's checks. Now, this was pre-digitization of everything. So changing money, you're looking at the better part of half a day sometimes, depending on where you are, because everything is done manually and by phone. They didn't have any of the automated systems in parts of the country. While I'm waiting for him, I'm standing out on the pavement, and I've just smoking a cigarette and just taking in the quiet, the solitude of the place. And down there on the road, I could see this man on a moped. Now, not everyone should ride mopeds just because it's available to them. The best way I can describe this guy is he had no idea what he was doing. If you stuck a cow on a moped, he would have the same ability as a cow would. And I could see him kind of locked into this kind of, I don't know what I've got into, and I can't. And I thought, I see him coming my way, and it looks like he's coming straight at me. And foolishly, I thought, oh, he'll stop. He'll stop. And as he comes bearing down on me, he doesn't stop, and he just knocks me straight over. And then he comes off the bike. A bit of a noise, and it draws a bit of attention. Now, I'm fairly angry and incandescent, actually, that this man, I'm standing on the pavement. It's a completely open, empty road, and he just run me over. I take his keys, and I just hurl the keys, and they land in there's a great pile of rubbish on the other side of the road, and they land in this festering pile of stuff where cows are chewing the bananas that have been thrown away and stuff like that. He starts getting a bit angry and starts making quite a lot of noise. Wants me to go and get the keys. And I'm not going to get the fucking keys. You go and get the keys. A crowd starts to form. As the crowd forms, he's now performing to the crowd, as happens in some of the rural parts. You take your argument into the marketplace, and essentially people have a row and then plead their case to the marketplace. And essentially whoever wins over the crowd wins the argument.
Amazing.
That's what started to occur here. As the crowd form, a police officer comes over. And I'm not sure he's a police officer. The guys, they dress in green. They've got a big stick. And I don't know whether they're formal police or what they are. I've never really quite understood how the jurisdictions work. But he comes over. He doesn't say much. And he kind of listening to this guy. And he pokes me with the stick. And I'm like, what is this? Is this my prompt? Is this, what is it? I don't know what to do. And at that moment, a guy in a rickshaw pulls up alongside and he says, get in. So I get in this rickshaw and he drives off. And I'm thinking, I don't know what happens next. We drove around the block and all the way back round. And now I'm at the other side of the crowd. And he says, all right, you can get out now. And I get out and people look at me and I said, so what's happening? And they start to tell me the story of this Westerner because they don't know it's me. And I'm now at the back of the crowd. It was the most absurd situation I have ever been in, and beyond comical for its just. And for me, that's just the classic India. For me, is the rickshaw driver thought, I know what to do. We'll take him out the front of the crowd and drop him back around the back. No one will know it's him.
That's quite benevolent, though, isn't it? I mean, that's quite a nice thing to do. I mean, I remember when I was in Thailand, and we a friend and I, we were going down from where were we? I think we were quite north. I think it was went from Bangkok down to the south of the country on the I don't know what to call it other than the poor bus, which is a non-air conditioned bus, people getting on with chickens in cages and stuff like that. And I remember there was a young couple, and it was like a boy and a girl, and they were maybe about 17, 18, and the bus would stop. It was maybe about a 12-hour journey, and the bus would stop every couple of hours to let people go off, have a pee, get some water or something like that. It was raging in there. And I think these two people, this sort of, I don't know, they're a couple of brother and sister, they took pity on the two sort of phalanx, and they're like, they came back, and we were like, no, we're not going to get off the bus this time. And they came back and they handed us 2 bottles of water. And I think as Westerners, we were like, what's this? Where's this kindness of which you speak? Why would you do that? Is it, have you stuck rohypnol in the water? And they were like, we can see that you're kind of out of your depth and you need a bit of a help. And that was like, I was like, it sort of makes me a bit sad that kindness to a stranger I had to go to the other side of the world to experience it. I'm sure that that's there are probably stories contrary to that here and stuff like that, and I've witnessed that to some extent. But it was just like strangers talking to me, giving me things like, what's this? That's
I think sadly that will start to change, because that's been my experience of India too. Is the kindness of strangers is the norm. It is quite remarkable. What compared to what would happen here. I think as things industrialize, become more technological, as people become more middle class, have more disposable income, indulgence is more important than generosity. And we know, I mean, there's been enough studies that have demonstrated that essentially the less a person has, the more likely they are to share it.
Yeah.
And there's been some YouTubers have tried to replicate this actually with great effect, although the purpose is behind. If you go into a restaurant or go into an open air eating area and ask people for food, most people won't give you a share of their food. But if you go to a homeless person and ask for food, they'll give you what they've got, because there's a strong empathy and a strong understanding. But once people start to get resources of indulgence, they become protective of those things and don't want to lose it. And I think so. I do think attitudes will change over time as they begin to import really what are the worst aspects of Westernization. As they see that as very modern and desirable, I think they'll lose a lot of the stuff and end up a lot like us, which it's sad. But at the same time, then do we deny people progress in order to keep them kind? And because it's that paradox, how do we get a reasonable balance between indulgence and kindness?
What was there was one other I think there's a couple of stories that you've told me over the years that really stick in my mind. One I might come to later, but there was another one, I think it was in India, where you thought that you were ushered onto a stage to give a lecture, to give a training or something. What was that in Turkey?
No. Right, to cut a very long story short, I was up in the northeast corridor. Now, if you come out of India main and then you're into areas like Sikkim and Nagaland, there's all sorts of areas where they're permit only, and so they heavily restrict the access to anyone to go in there. So often it's on a quota as well. So I had to get a permit to go in. Absolutely. It's one of those things, everyone must go there before they die. It is the most stunningly beautiful area I could ever imagine visiting. It's just remarkable. So I'm in this particular area. I'm there for, I think I've got a 30-day permit to be there. And in this one particular town, absolutely stunning town, they had told me of this particular monastery that I could go and visit. To get to it, I had to go down this hill here, and then basically there's a path that goes up through the hills, and it's pretty much half a day's walk. So that what they said to me is go at sunrise, start walking, because it's a long way, a real long way. You can't mistake it, you just stay on the path. When you get there, spend a little while, but start coming back very shortly after midday, definitely before 1 o'clock, because you don't want to be caught out on the hills in the dark. Because when it goes dark in India, it's like 6:10, the sun is up. 6:15, it's pitch black. And it's just the nature of the closer you are to the equator, the faster the transition of sunrise, sunset. And so I was cautioned heavily about this because there's no way of driving there. So they packed me up a lunch. The guys at the guest house, they packed me up all my supplies, and I was very young and fit back then. And I start my march, and I get to this place, and it's like I've reached is it Shambhala, whatever it is, Shangri? I can't remember what the word is. I've reached this paradise that's in the middle of nowhere, and these people come out, and there's lots of children running around, hey! Like this, and people are so gracious and so pleased to see me. It was like, wow, it's because I'm a Westerner. They've probably never seen a Westerner before.
Bless them.
And I'm sat down, and they take my shoes off, and I've got somebody starts washing my feet. Now that's weird for someone like myself. That's okay, but it's because they're so. And then I get given this robe and this big thing, and I take off. I go and get changed, and I put this robe on. It's like, oh, this is nice. This is quite an experience. And then I get led through. I'm just going along with this thing in this completely colonial mindset of being, it's because I'm English. They treat me so. And then these doors open, and I'm led into a conference room, and it's a huge conference room, and there's all these people. They all look very important, from the Buddhist community, very important looking people around, and people start clapping. And then I get handed, in a ceremonial way, this cup of salted butter tea. I'd never heard of that before. That was completely new to me. Took a sip of it, and I jokingly said, "Don't you like me?" Because it was absolutely disgusting. And I've got a microphone in front of me, and people start laughing. And I discover there is something gone wrong here. They think I'm someone else.
Oh my God.
They were actually expecting a German guy who was probably a sociological professor or whatever, who was arriving the same day, because they were having some conference on Buddhist thought, Buddhist philosophy, and I had just arrived at the opportunistic moment, and they thought I was him. And because now I'm like, oh, because I know the moment I've gone into this room that there is something's awry, and then I get ushered back out again. The robe comes back off, thinking me back in my shoes. It's like, yeah, thanks for coming.
You didn't try and style it out.
Actually, a day or two later, that made a little feature in the local paper about this Englishman who was mistaken for, I think it's a German professor.
Yeah.
Very awkward.
They weren't referring to you as a charlatan or anything like that.
No, it was just this ridiculous. It was just a little tiny piece, but it was just one of those ridiculous moments of perfect timing, of being in the right place at the right time. It kind of reminds me of that fella who went for an interview at the BBC. Do you remember this one? He's famous guy. He was a driver, and he was going for a job as a driver at the BBC, and they mistook him for the expert, and they usher him into the studio, and he's live.
Oh, I remember that.
He's live on.
Can't remember what the topic was.
It was something to do with technology or something, and absolutely, he was majestic. I probably wasn't quite as majestic as he was able to carry that off. I think I just looked like a fool.
So like, you are someone that has always struck me as being, you're quite transparent, and you're quite different in the way that a lot of people that have got that will present, whether it's a training or anything like that, or speaking to camera, is you're quite and this is quite interesting for me personally, because you're able to speak about your shortcomings quite subjectively, without doing, which is what I do, or trying to do less of, without feeling the need to self-deprecate. How do you do that? Because you've obviously demonstrated quite a good kind of level of introspection, but there seems to be very little kind of like shield or a mask that most people have, that you're quite happy to say, yeah, I was addicted to this, or yeah, I had mental health issues, and like, there's no kind of fear of I don't know, it's lacking a fear of judgment. I don't know what it is. How do you do that?
No, I know exactly what it is, and in all honesty, this is only really, I would say, the last 4 years. I think up until a certain point, about 4 years ago, thereabouts, I was just like everybody else, if not worse, and that I would have a lot of bluster, a lot of BS, a lot of pretense, and I started to become very, very aware of that. I think through the work that I do, and through exam and always learning more stuff, I started to become aware, mostly of status. It was an area that I had completely missed in terms of my own personal development, my own investigations and stuff. And it came through a study of acting, through improvisation and acting, where actors are very aware of status trading and status games. Now, when I got introduced to that, I thought, this is a whole area of human potential, human psychology, human development that I had no idea of. And I began to examine that in myself, and I could see just how status obsessed I was. How I was more interested in what everyone thought of me than getting on with the work.
Right.
And so I began to do a very lengthy introspection on all of my status issues. Now, with the metaphors of movement work that I had developed at that point, and already had status in the metaphors of movement work, I realized I started to learn the extent by which people are status focused. And so by repeated examination of my status issues, I ended up becoming much more grounded.
Right.
Now, when status issues are about elevation, when I elevate myself up, I want you to look up to me. I look down on other people, but I want everyone to look up to me. I'm in an elevated position of importance. People fear being brought down. And there's this constant knowing that their position, they can never progress from that position because they're in an elevated position. They have to maintain it. So struggling to maintain a status position is very difficult, and a lot of work. And I realized that was part of my internal machinations for the things I still wasn't happy with, where I was still suffering anxiety issues, for example. I began to really notice just how much that was status related. Once I had worked on that, I noticed the initial and immediate calming, where I no longer had an anxiety I didn't know I had. It was only by the fact it wasn't there anymore did I suddenly discover I had a background level of anxiety. Now, this is how much my denial had gone into. Up until, was it 4 years ago? It might actually be longer now. My tracking of time is appalling. It might actually be, say, 6 or 8 years ago. But whenever it was that this all happened, I was still taking beta blockers.
Right.
To go onto a stage in front of an audience to give any of my trainings on that first morning, or if it was an evening presentation, I would half an hour before take some propranolol in order to take the edge off the anxiety. That was the only way I could do it.
What is that, Andy? I don't know what that is.
It basically blocks the action of adrenaline. Propranolol is the other name for it. I can't remember now. It's basically an anxiolytic. It blocks adrenaline effects. And that's, I had been using propranolol for years, many years, and I hadn't really noticed because it was so normal for me to do that. As soon as I addressed the status issues in myself, I never even felt the need for it anymore. And then I immediately, in the next presentation I gave, I told everyone. And I've never now kept, because I never told anyone before. It's a little secret I kept to myself. Yeah. And largely it was a secret I kept from myself as well, which is insane. That then enabled me to start to have a look at what else am I hiding from myself that's actually true about me. That here's the reality. Did anyone else know that I was an anxious person? Everyone would have known. Everyone, we're always the last one to know these things about ourselves. Everyone else knows. So I figured, what's the point in pretending? And then I decided to take that to its as the extremities I could take it to. What is the point of pretending? Let's just drop the whole pretense. And as a result, life got a lot easier. And actually, I think people thought of me a lot better now because I'm no longer pretending.
Yeah, it's weird because, I mean, certainly, I've known you a long time and rate you as a dear friend and stuff. And yet I still think, almost like your ability to be quite so transparent, I think is so fucking weird because it almost elevates your status, like within that kind of whole paradigm. It's like almost like a transcendent. I'm not blowing smoke up your ass or anything like that, but within the structure or the lens of status, being able to it's like going clear. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's gone clear. He's able to see his own. So I think, I really like that, and I think I like the ability to be able to be subjective about your own experience without feeling the need to deride it, shame it, or self-deprecate, or something that I certainly have been working on myself because I always thought, well, if I sort of put myself down before anyone else, I remember this and I think this is how I learned to be this way. I was always used to read comics, and I used to love the X-Men, and there's Wolverine, with his claws, and he had this phrase, "Do it to them before they do it to you." And I was like, it's amazing, these kind of tropes and ideas that we use to really quite fundamentally structure our in persona. What a little cartoon that somebody wrote, and I'm like, I'm basing a corner of my persona on this thing, and so this thing about do it to them before they do it to you, kind of like, obviously he's like this super aggressive kind of like a mutant and stuff like that, and I kind of that sort of somehow worked within me, where it's like, if I put, because I was obviously I was always quite insecure about the way I looked because I had scarring on my nose, and I still do, and I hopefully I'm getting better, but I always used to talk like that, so you get to see the pretty side, not the ugly side, because that's the bit where I've got a chunk out of my ear and the scar and the nostril isn't right and all the rest of it. And so I would always, in order to try and what's the word, diffuse the bomb of feeling insecure or lesser or ugly, I suppose. I would always kind of like I wove into the fabric of the way I present this self-deprecating thing, where
So you're
I'm always sort of
depotentiating the
yeah,
ability for somebody else to do it on your behalf. You're
yeah,
taking the
exactly,
power
yeah.
away from the other person.
Yeah. So it's like, well, I did it to myself. So, you don't. So, and in a way, it's weird because as I'm reflecting now, it's almost like I'm taking the ownership of being insulted by insulting myself. But in the real world and in the grown-up world, less and less do people actually insult each other. But it was something that from this, it was like an artifact from childhood and I think that it's just like what you're saying. I'm sure all of us have got these artifacts that are from childhood that that are, just like if you get a bit of grit embedded into your hand, the skin grows over and it becomes almost part of you. And it's like, there are probably these artifacts that are within us that we aren't even aware of because they've become such a default part of us. And yet, actually, with the appropriate introspection and then sadly fucking hard work, can we actually go on and make sort of change the mechanism, the structure of those things? I mean, it is bloody fascinating, really.
There's another area as well that I would urge everyone to really examine, and it's not something you just think about one time and okay, we've done that, like on a personal development training course. So one of the things within personal development, it encourages us to be fake. Most of these things are set up that you have to be bigger than life. You can never just be, yeah, I'm all right. You're just all right. I'm fine. Don't you know what fine stands for? And then something, you should be great. And there's this whole paradigm that, you should be this epitome of greatness and success. It's utterly ridiculous. They even say, with these tools, you can change the world. Most people can't even change their bed. They can't even, let alone change the world. But one of the other paradigms is the issue of shame avoidance. And this is something I've been looking so much into in recent years, is that so many people's behaviors, especially the egotistical fakery of persona, that kind of stuff, they're actually trying to avoid the feeling of shame. Because shame is one of the most intensely unpleasant emotions people can ever have, and they'll do anything to avoid it, including living a falsity their entire life. Because it's better to live a falsity than be shamed for who you are. Now, like guilt is always going to be about what we do, but shame is very much about the identity and who we are. And if I am not good enough by whatever measurements I'm measuring good enough against, then I'm immediately prone to shame for not being that. So I better act and be convincing with it in order to avoid shame. And that's one of the key areas. So I started really addressing shame issues in myself. And most of these things are absolute trivia. And they may not be things that have ever happened because, I've been troubled by so many things and some of them actually did happen, but most of them never do. And shame avoidance is one of those things that what we think other people will, how we'll be shamed by other people. We have a very much a shame economy as well by social media, the calling out of people. And I know people who know me on or knew me on social media may well have been on the receiving end of this, where I tell them, what do you think you're doing posting that? Because like, this man abuses dogs, and there's a vague photo of a man that no one knows who he is holding a dog, but there's an accusation, and then 1 million people share it. Well, what if that was you in that photo? And it's got nothing to do with the stalker that posted it in the first place. It's got nothing. No one knows that, but no one even cares because it's the burn the witch. Everyone enjoys a good witch burning. The modern day shaming now, of course, is by naming and shaming, doxing, calling people out on the basis of what evidence? We don't need evidence. We just know there's no smoke without fire. And so we have that as a very powerful thing in our human archetypes. Humans have always done that. The madness of crowds in burning the witch or stoning the prostitute, whatever it is a strong archetype. And everyone likes a good stoning. Everyone likes a good burning. As a result, we must maintain a good social face at all times, lest we be one of those people. And whoever questions whether the witch is in fact a witch is now themselves accused of witchcraft and will be burned. So once the mob gets in, you can't suggest some rational sanity because you're accused next. Now, with that was something I was witnessing on such a prolific level on social media for years, and it was a really ugly thing. John Ronson wrote a book, So You've Been Shamed. It's not what that's the subtitle. It's called something else. That's well worth reading. And Russell Brand, of all people, his stand-up show, if you get a copy of it, The Messiah Complex.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely remarkable. Absolutely. Those two, the book and the Russell Brand stand-up show in combination taught me a lot about shame and shame avoidance. And so I started to work through, what am I avoiding? And this is work I do with clients as well. And it's amazing how many psychological and emotional problems go away and how much life improvement happens when we just deal with shame that's never happened. Because one of the problems about therapy is they're always regressing to cause. They want to find what in psychiatry we've got positive and negative symptoms. That's not good and bad. It depends on whether a positive symptom is a voice is talking to me. That's a positive symptom. Something is additional to the system. A negative system is a lack of emotion, a lack of motivation. So that's when something is missing. When we look at shame avoidance and we start to look at the effect that has on both positive and negative symptoms, it is incredible what results can be achieved in a person's life changes in such a short space of time. And we're not regressing to cause, because this is stuff that hasn't happened. It's in a completely different paradigm. And it's stuff I try and teach coaches and therapists. But yeah. I keep saying I have to lower my expectations, but I'm still, despite my contempts, I do try and be optimistic and hopeful that possibly people can understand these concepts. But this is a huge area for how do we drop the persona and be much more transparent to who we really are. Study shame as a full subject.
Yeah, I remember we did some filming with some people a few years ago. It must be 5 years ago, probably more than that. And I remember,
was this in the upstairs of the pub?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And God, that was at least 10 years ago.
Oh God, maybe. Yeah. And there was, and I was fairly entrenched in the IMT model, and I'm going to talk about your work in a minute if we can. And there was one lady, who was a very slim lady, and I'd sort of done and tried to do some work with her and stuff, and then you were sitting with her, and it was, they were willing participants and stuff like that, and you did something that was like, oh wow, it was so bloody obvious, but it was away from the paradigm of regressing to cause kind of thing, which I know is obviously, there's something to that, and you were basically almost like future pacing and doing some IMT stuff, and we'll talk about what IMT is in a minute, but you're actually doing some stuff where it was like imagining something happening in the future and doing some work about that, even though that had never happened. And I thought that was really like, wow, that's really revolutionary. But actually it's like you're just moving in the other direction, because obviously fear and anxiety is future orientated to some extent, at least. And I thought that was really interesting that you've done that. But the big model is, how did you learn to feel that way? And we speak about that in IMT, but it's also, I think it's almost like, how did you learn to fear what might actually not ever happen, but is still, for some reason you're holding it very carefully as in the structure of your experience but it might, and so I have to be kind of like prepared and aware from that. So I thought that was really interesting. So can you just talk about what you're doing now, and obviously the stuff, the models that you have worked on before, and I suppose this is really not so much, this podcast, I don't really care to have it go out to people who are in the sort of self-help industry. I just fucking, there's enough of that shit out there. I shouldn't really say that, but so it's more for like individuals who are actually normal, whatever that means, functional or dysfunctional human beings, that how they could understand something like IMT, your work, metaphors of movement. Just talk about that if you can.
Well, so the first body of work that I think I developed was really and formalized and it was given a name, is IMT, which is Integral Eye Movement Therapy. Now, that's a problematic name for multitude of reasons. It's too much a sound alike to eye movement integration, which ironically is what I was calling what I was doing, thinking I'd come up with that name myself. I was so clever. I came up with a great sounding name, eye movement integration. And it was only when I went to trademark it, I discovered that it was already trademarked. Oh, that's awkward. Oh, by Steve Andreas and Connie Ray Andreas came up with it. And I'd already known them for a few years at this point. So now I have conversations with them. They tell me the history of how that came about. Now, the influences I had for the integral eye movement therapy was based around limited exposure to EMDR when I was still working at the hospital. And I was looking at the exceptions to when EMDR doesn't, basically when doesn't it work? Why does it work so well for that patient, but for that patient, it didn't have any effect whatsoever? What are the qualitative differences between the two? And around the differences between those two things, I started to build some models of understanding. I was then experimenting with a number of areas of eye movement myself. And IMT was then born out of that after going on the road and doing these experimental workshops that I was doing around the south of England. And as it started off as 2 hours, and then with the data I got, it became 3, and then more data, it became 4, then it became a day. And then subsequently, at the time I think I met you, I was then working on the 2-day format, but still hadn't formalized it. It hadn't become what it is today. It was in its still rudimentary form. It's not just for anyone out there. So is it the same as EMDR? No, it's not. It's not the same as EMDR in terms of the applications are entirely different and the models used are entirely different. The only similarity it has is we're getting people to move their eyes. That's the only similarity. And it might say, well, they've got to be the same. Yeah, well, Richard Bandler's NLP is identical to Freudian psychoanalysis because they both use words. There is no world of similarity between the structures of the two models. And so it's the same with IMT and other eye movement models. So this was largely built around how, not resolving trauma, although that's an application of it, how does traumatic experience shape largely personality? Because we get imprinted on various ways of feeling, and then we project those feelings out into the present and future experiences. And that's the world we then live in. And so with some very, very simple work, rather than focusing in on trauma, we focus in on what supports the emotion you're feeling in the here and now, and then work with that stuff. And what the observation is the remarkable speed by which people change, and how long lasting that is, and how many changes people go on to make once they're liberated from a feeling they probably didn't even know they had. But it's been driving part of who they are at an identity level. And so that's what that was. Then, as I developed the identity work from that, the eye movements became less and less important. Patterns of chronicity, which is the central piece of the IMT model, which is how do people stay stuck, they still continue to be important. And I was looking at patterns of chronicity and identity, but the eye movements became less and less frequent, and I was becoming much more metaphorical with what I was looking at. Until I co-presented a workshop with Sean Atwood, and Sean Atwood he's not quite famous now on YouTube. He's got a big channel. If you haven't seen his channel, it's worth watching. He was a former prisoner in the US. He was one of the US's biggest ecstasy dealers. And I'd done a number of conversations and some work with Sean, and we co-presented on a workshop, which, by the way, is available on the integraleyemovementtherapy.com website. And people can access that as an associate member. So you don't have to be a formal member, along with all the other material that's on there. At that workshop, I realized I wasn't doing the eye movements anymore. I was doing something entirely different. I didn't know what I was doing. And shortly after then, I met up with Charles Faulkner, and I had some conversation with Charles Faulkner that left me completely bamboozled. Such a clever man, and so intellectual. And I have no idea what did he say. What did he say to me? He said a lot, but so I then spent a year working out what Charles had said to me, and then the metaphors of movement work then started to emerge, and that's still developing. I mean, all these years later, I'm still finding new models.
What does that look like for people who have no idea what that means?
So this is listening to people in a very, very different way to what people would normally listen to. Because an awful lot of conversation and communication is subconscious. It's below the conscious threshold. Your sentence structure, the idiomatic communication that you use. Idioms are everyday expressions that reflect shared experience. And within shared experience, we have common knowledge and shared knowledge. Shared is you know it and I know it. And common is we both know the other one knows it. So it doesn't need explaining between two parties. But with shared knowledge, I have to know if you know it or not, in order for it to become common knowledge between two parties. So that's an important principle too. And we're utilizing how shared and common knowledge in the therapeutic relationship massively affects the perception of the problem by the client. And that when we move your isolated suffering that you don't know if anyone else ever understands, and so far you've never communicated it adequately to anyone else that they could understand, and have probably never communicated it adequately to yourself in order to understand it clearly. What we're able to do is using the idiomatic communication and moving your knowledge to a position of shared knowledge and then into common knowledge, it de-isolates your suffering into a thing that actually everyone can relate to. That in itself depotentiates the vast majority of the problem. Now, from that position, we can then introduce some changes that are quite dramatic. It's fairly fast work and it's highly generative. So it generates new behavior. And often those new behaviors are generated at an unconscious level. So you find yourself doing things differently, but don't really know why. It's quite complicated to try and explain it in a nutshell, but essentially, yeah, it's metaphors, isn't it? We work with metaphors. But the problem with that is the moment I tell people I do metaphor work, they go, yeah, I did that. I've done NLP. I know about metaphors. Okay, there's no relationship between what you've learned in isomorphic therapeutic metaphors, say David Gordon's work from the NLP world, or, oh yeah, it's the same as clean language, isn't it? Yeah, you've just ripped off clean language, which I get a lot. People say that to me a lot. They go, okay, have you trained in clean language? No. Have you ever looked at any of my work in metaphors? No. And yet you know enough that they're the same. Okay. We've got some work to do. And that's so one of the difficulties, the moment I say metaphor, people go into immediately their experience of metaphor and assume that's what I'm doing. 100%. Never had anyone come on any of the events and say, yeah, this is stuff I already know. It's never happened. Everyone tells me this is completely new material to them, because it is. So I'm very pleased with it, and I say it's developing more and more as time goes on, as I learn more myself.
So what drives you as an individual? Because I mean, you've effectively created two, I don't want to call them therapeutic models, but conceptual models that have got applications that certainly have therapeutic applications, or applications for change. What you know, it sounds cheesy to say what gets you up in the morning, but like, what drives you to continue to create? Like, this is quite a bloody big body of work.
It's really easy.
It's not easy. Do you think?
For me, the motivation, what the motivation is really easy, in that most of this is the solution to my own torment.
Right.
See, how many people, as I mean, you referenced it before, how many people go on training events, go on personal development courses because actually they have issues, they're messed up, and they need help in sorting themselves out. And there's nothing wrong with that as a motivation. Well, that was my motivation. You see, I had in my early 20s, with all the problems that I had shopped around. Medication. Okay, that was actually, of all the things I did, that was the most helpful. I shopped around various hypnotherapists. I didn't know some of them were NLPers, which is why, because of the anxiety issues I recognized people kept saying to me, did you know that anxiety is just excitement by a different name? And like, when I heard that for the fourth and fifth time, it's like, these people know what they're doing. And I shopped around, and everywhere I went, I was failing to find anyone that I thought had enough brain cells to be able to offer anything of substance. And it was a very frustrating time for me. Now, I was studying Bateson. I'd long since studied R.D. Laing, and I was still looking at these areas. Then I got involved in hypnotherapy. I learned hypnotherapy. From there, I got involved in NLP and that kind of stuff. But they were limited in terms of the benefit I was able to achieve. And I really questioned the level of benefit that a lot of the people from the scene that I was meeting were deriving to, because most of them seemed to be using ego to cover up the problems they had. There seemed to be a masking over of issues rather than a changing and transformation of self. And so as the years have gone on and I recognized I still had issues, I needed to find ways to deal with those. And so my motivation has largely been to sort myself out. That's the reality of it. Whether I've achieved that or not, I think I've reached a point where I've been quite happy with myself now for a number of years, especially since addressing status and shame. That's definitely made the difference. I'm quite pleased with me as work in progress, but others may disagree, of course. They may, because everyone has different perceptions on things.
So if you've reached, you've reached Austin Nirvana, like how are you going to be? How are you going to be motivated henceforth then?
Well, my next thing is to keep growing the hair, get a longer beard, and become a prophet. Because I've seen the latest fashion within the personal development world now. Everyone's a guru, a spirit. They're all spiritual now. The spiritual is the new tradition, new fashion. And very much tarot is becoming a very popular thing, and magic is the big thing. So they all jump on that bandwagon. Now, of course, as you know, that's my primary background in all of this. I started out in magic long before therapy. It's cringeworthy. I imagine it's like Buddhists, real Buddhists, looking at mindfulness. Where they've some aspects of it has been pinched from Buddhism and just cringe. I have the same view. So my next logical progression now is to become a prophet.
Cool. And I'm sure we've had a discussion on the phone one time where between the two of us we thought it'd be a good idea to start a cult. And I was quite interested in sort of being like the the tough number two who like keeps them all in line. And gosh, oh God, I was going to say something. It was, what's your view on not hypnotherapists and NLPs? Because I think probably by now people have sort of built up a picture of what do you think about those modalities themselves? I mean, you said that you felt that for you that they had a certain amount of impact.
I think the modalities are well worth studying, and in a lot of contexts, in a lot of cases, will be very effective. It just depends on the extent by which they can be applied and the context and the person to which they're applicable. I don't think even the creators themselves would pretend for 1 second these are the only things to learn. I mean, certainly in the experiences I've had around Bandler, I don't know Grinder. I've met him. I've never been in any training environment with him. But Bandler is absolutely vociferous in this is not the only thing you need to come and study. You need to go and study everything and learn a lot more stuff. He's been absolutely vociferous on that. So I don't think there's any pretense in terms of this is the grand unified theory. But I do think the idiot factor who then jump on these things as their own personal favorite solutions to the whole world's problems, they then go and espouse it to be more than it actually is. So the models themselves are absolutely, I think, are amazing. The stuff that Bandler and Grinder developed, I think, was so groundbreaking. It opened the doors, because once people have that little bit of knowledge, they go, "Oh, whoa, that can be applied to that," and now I see all those things differently too. And some of the innovators that spilled out of the early days of NLP have come up with some astonishing stuff. We look at, like, say, the developments of Connie Ray Andreas with her most recent thing, the wholeness work and core transformation. Absolutely remarkable bodies of work. And she's not alone. There's other innovators that too. Diltz has done stuff, interesting stuff there, also worth learning. It's the scope of application that's the issue, and the problem of therapists and coaches over generalizing their successes. So because, say, the fast phobia cure works on phobias, and it's dramatic. You have a person who's got a complete screaming phobia 1 minute, 15 minutes later, there's the tarantula sitting on their hand, and they're all curious about it. That's really visceral, very, very obvious change to people. And then they go, "Well, I work with depression. Yeah, I just do the double dissociation on depression." And I think I can't even process what you have just said there, because that makes no cognitive sense to me whatsoever. And so people start to use these phrases these labels and terminologies of proper processes and technique against something else. They're referring to something else they've done as though it's this thing, and then the whole waters get muddied. And I know there are plenty of practitioners out there who've gone on to become master practitioners and gone on to be trainers who have never trained in the thing that they think they're teaching. Because you can go to some shoddy school of NLP and learn what they think of as NLP. Yes, we in our NLP course, we study metaphor and archetypes and hero's journey. Well, that's not fucking NLP. What are you doing? But now they've got their certificate and they think they've learned NLP, and they've learned something of there's nothing to do with it. They then go on and then certify. And the next thing you know, what's passing as this is nothing to do with it. There's so much that goes on. It's awful. I don't see that changing anytime soon.
No.
All these quality control companies that set up, they're all protecting the standards. You notice they're protecting the standards, whether they're the ANLP, the ATNLP, the BBNLP, the BNLP, the ABNLP. There's thousands and thousands of. There's more cropping up every month, all protecting the field. They're clearly not doing a very good job. That's all I can say.
So, I want to in a second talk to you a little bit about Magick. But first, while it's in my head, because I've got the Dory kind of like 6-second brain thing going on. I just want to ask you, and that's something that you've always been, and I think we sort of touched on elements around that, but your ability to kind of, I suppose, hold your ground and be in very socially cringeworthy, uncomfortable situations, and be steadfast. And so if I was going to give an example, so the viewers and listeners can get their head around. So there's this thing where that you teach when you teach IMT, and it's people are going, oh, you're teaching IMT, and you're waggling your fingers and you're asking a set of questions, and you're looking at patterns of chronicity. And then, of course, naturally a kind of phenomenon when people are learning are go, well, what if that happens? And you've already set your stall out at the beginning of the training by saying, I do not answer what if questions. And you do this whole set piece, this skit around the fact that you don't answer what if questions. In spite of that, people, because they're there to try and learn and stuff like that, and they've forgotten that instruction or that element of information, and then they're asking, well, what if this happens? And then I've seen, oh God, we used to sort of, I used to host you and stuff, and then you'll just hold the space and maintain eye contact and not kind of like puff up or anything, but you'll just quite matter-of-factly say, I don't answer what if questions, and kind of stand there, and I can still see you sort of stand there, maybe twiddling a pen or just quite relaxed. And then the person is like, hang on, you're not meeting the social dance. I've asked you a question. I paid in a couple of £100, few £100, whatever, to be taught, and it has to be taught my way. And you're not answering that. And then they'll amplify that, but you're not responding to that amplification. And I've been there, and I've been thinking, like, oh, fuck, oh, please, Andy, just this once, answer him. Answer the what if question, please. And I felt really uncomfortable.
The tension gets very strong hideous in that room.
Yeah. How the hell do you do that? How did you learn to do that? How can we learn to do that?
There's two elements to this. So once I understood this whole notion, this whole thing, without now teaching the audience here what that's all about with the what if questions, but essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating a certain situation that I'm setting up ahead of time. In order to engineer a particular experience for everyone in the room that then becomes a reference point for me later on. Now, in order to arrive at that, I had to sit down and work it out. How can I, without anyone knowing, set that up? And I was aware, I got it. I was aware of how I could do it in the varying possible ways. But then I was assisting on the NLP, one of the NLP trainings with Bandler and John Laval. And I saw John Laval do something. The first time it got my attention because I thought, I never saw the setup. I never ever saw the setup for that. And I thought maybe there wasn't a setup. It's just what the nature of things that are emerging. But John's a clever guy. Got to be a setup. And then on a subsequent training where I'm assisting, I see him do the same thing again. And I saw the setup. I saw the setup coming. And I thought, okay, that's beautiful. And so now it wasn't the structure of the setup that I was using was the same. It was the delivery of it via how I am being. Because in the early days that I was doing that, I felt the tension too. I used to think, oh, this is so uncomfortable, and I'm masking it the best I can to look like. And then when I saw John doing the thing he did, which is not the same, it's a completely different thing, but I saw the beautiful delivery of it. I thought, okay, I need to be like that in the setup and the delivery. So it really helped having. I first of all had the structure. And then I found the form or the content by which to deliver that structure. And I found that by copying somebody else. So that was it. But also the other one is repeated practice makes it easier. They say it's like murder. After a while, it gets a lot easier.
Yeah. Well, I have to take your word for that. But yeah, so I mean, that was. I remember in a previous employ, obviously go back maybe about 12, 13 years ago. And there was an HR woman, and she was the head of HR, and she was also a director of the company. So, talk about conflict of interest there. And she had this wonderful technique where you'd go in and you'd say, okay, right, talk to me about your problem. And you'd speak about your problem, and then you'd speak and you'd come to the end of your communication where it would come to like a natural kind of closing because you've said your piece. And then you're going to wait for her response. But what she did this thing where she'd go, she wouldn't say anything. She would sort of go, she would raise her eyes. And I was like, and I knew I was being manipulated. And I just started to look at NLP, and I was just like, now I'm babbling. And I'm saying things that I don't even want to tell her it's not strategically good for me to tell her and stuff like that. And I thought that was absolutely sort of communication. I mean, it's genius, but it was that ability to just like hold the space. And it's a real skill that is absolutely worth learning, and I think, that physically in jiu-jitsu that we talk about, being comfortable in uncomfortable situations. The first time in jiu-jitsu where you have got somebody who is, and this is something that I employ, in the game that I play, when I'm doing jiu-jitsu, is like I will have my arm wrapped round your back, and I will be pushing my shoulder into your head and into your neck, and smothering you. I know how to direct all of my weight to crush you. I'm literally on my tiptoes. So all of that, and it's a very uncomfortable thing. Now, once you've been doing that for a few years, or even a few concentrated months, you learn how to relax into that pressure and breathe through it, and know that that's just one of the variables, and that you won't die from it and stuff like that. It might be painful actually, but initially there's that. It freaks you out and it spasms you, and you end up physically blurting stuff out and giving people an arm, which is like the whole point in jiu-jitsu. And I think that skill that of that holding your state, for want of a better phrase, and just standing your ground and being able to, it's like swim in the sea of discomfort, which obviously you've demonstrated many times to me. And I think that's such a game-changing skill to learn in life,
Yeah, allowing yourself to see. One of the things, when people have this awkward silence, people feel the need to break the silence, and the ability to not feel that need, and allow the words the person has just spoken, allow them just to hang in the air, and echo around forevermore, is a very powerful thing to do. I learned this with dog training too. So we got two dogs. I grew up with dogs, so I'm familiar with dogs, and we got a Alsatian, so he's a Malinois. So he's a very very intelligent animal. Here's what I know: if you tell the dog off because he's done something wrong again, And then they do the guilt, don't they? They do all the guilty thing, and they're just all, oh, I'm so sorry, never do it again. They will, when you go and let them know it's okay now. Because they leave them in shame for 5 minutes, they go and tell them it's okay. The dog will repeat the behavior. But of course, if you tell them off, they do the shame thing, and then you get on with your life and never bring a closure to that, they'll never do it again. And I learned that with rats as well, because I had rats for years, and training a rat, they're so intelligent, they're amazing. And never give the apology after you tell them off, because basically you've just undone the work you've just done. So when it's left open, and this is an effect I'm using, because with a lot of therapy stuff is not just, and in the training room as well, it's not just about teaching people about stuff. Sometimes you actually have to put a change in there. And everyone seems to think, I say everyone, like massive generalization, but therapists seem to think change only comes by doing a procedural technique. And sometimes you just need to hold a mirror up to a certain behavior and allow the person to have that, and now they can't get closure on it. That's quite a powerful, in itself is quite a powerful thing, and it works extremely well in animal training, and there's no reason why it shouldn't work any less effectively. Or no reason why it should work less effectively in people. And so these are some of the principles that I employ. The challenge I have as a trainer of people who do this is getting people to actually start to adopt some of these practices themselves, because it steps out of the normal paradigm by which people behave. And most people end up entirely being meta and talking to people about stuff, and then taking them through technique and process in order to try and get the change work. And they're never actually doing the change work from within those. So for me, a technique and process is the excuse to do the change. It isn't the change itself. So if I take you through a 6-step reframe, okay, I know the 6-step reframe is a fantastically structured intervention for people. It's one of the genius things I've ever seen. But that's not the technique I'm doing. That's not where I'm levering the change. The change is happening. That's just the excuse for the interaction I'm about to have with you. And within that interaction, that's where I'm doing the change work process. But this is quite sophisticated, quite complicated. And how do you even begin to teach that? Or how do I even begin to teach that to another person to do? There's not many people out there who are actually doing that. There's a few, but there's not many.
Yeah, cool. So tell us about Magick, and if you can speak on, for a lot of people, they will think that aren't maybe involved in some of the spiritual practices or personal development or stuff like that. They'll just think, you mean, I've got a magic wand stuff. They'll nice. Think that you mean that kind of magic. Yeah. Can you just explain in really simple terms, like what the hell is magic? Is it devil worship? Is it, what is it?
Yeah, magic's not any one particular thing. It's a whole collection. It's an umbrella term for a whole collection of stuff. Now, magic suffers a particular image problem as well. The same thing that happened with NLP, where people learn what they think is NLP, it's something completely different. And then over time, it becomes something else, and everyone's calling it that. The same thing happened within the magic stuff. And so now you get the Instagram generations of people who are witches. I'm an Instagram witch. I believe in Wicca. I'm very pagan. And it's not, they're not. They don't understand. The same thing happened with all the different magical disciplines. Magic is largely a collection of different philosophies. In the Western tradition, it's built around what's known as the Hermetic principle, which is the as above, so below. There's the duality and opposites, holding everything in balance. And that man is a microcosm of the universe, which is the macrocosm. And everything that is without is reflected within, and everything that's within is reflected without. Right. So by making changes on the microcosm, you create a corresponding change in the macrocosm. So literally, the world is we see the world as we are. That's a classic Hermetic thing that you'll see in personal development. Now, where that then starts to get crazy is when people go, well, I can hex somebody. I can cause damage to another being by making a corresponding change in myself. It corresponds something on the outside. And so now you get a whole school of thought that goes down that line. You get other people, which is, well, I use magic for spiritual practice. I'm very spiritual because I like dolphins. And then you get a whole genre of people that go down that line. Oh, yes, because it's crystals. They're very magical. I like crystals. That's why I always wear my birthstone. And they had no idea that birthstone was just an innovation by a crystal company to sell more stones. They don't know those things. So within the field, the vast majority of literature, websites, publications, audio programs, and podcasts are from people who are like that. Now, deep within there, you're going to find some of the original and authentic philosophical currents that everyone is so keen to jump on, but they don't really understand. And that's where you have the secret societies form. And the reason the secret societies form is very, very simple. It's to keep the true knowledge and that kind of stuff out of the hands of people like the NLP practitioners. It's to keep it out of the hands of the Instagram Wicca generation of young witches who are, you know, all sparkly and fairy-like. That is, and it's to keep it out of the hands of the goths who are doing the, you know, oh man, because I invoke Kronzon, man, because I like Black Sabbath and I wear a faded black t-shirt. It's to keep it out of the hands. So unfortunately, what most people think of as magic, they're not anywhere close to what it really is. But ultimately, it's a philosophy. And it's philosophical principles based around mathematics, based around a whole bunch of metaphors of the operating science of the Middle Ages and beyond, using a lot of archetypal metaphor and everything else. So that's essentially what's going on, but it's never anything that people think it is. And most people that would join one of these lodges or organizations will be sorely disappointed by what they find when they get there. Because actually, it's a lot of work, an insane amount of work. And I think it's why my general knowledge base in terms of what I do as a therapist is so well informed, because of the years I spent in various organizations studying magic and practicing it through the embodiment of some of the philosophies, which is what the rituals are. They're an embodiment of it. So you have a much more practical understanding of what it is you're talking about. That there's a lot of work involved. And of course, people don't want that. They want the likes on their Instagram account.
And so, are you saying that there aren't swords?
One of the early lodges I joined, you get some quite comical things. So here's one of the key things about the whole magic stuff is if you're involved in any magical group and there's not a great sense of fun and sense of humor, you're in the wrong group, and they may have got a few things wrong. And so it's a very high level of comedy can go on. So one of the lodges I used to meet in, it was in somebody's living room because, you know, we haven't got any money and haven't got anywhere we can hire out as a venue and all the rest of it. And so there's a lot of the rituals and the ceremonials are embodiments of principles because it's the only way you can actually break it down into a tangible way of understanding it. And quite often a ritual or ceremony is performed and then the teachings take place, because you now have a reference point of what's being discussed. And sometimes it's the other way around. That's quite a common thing. It's not the only form of ceremonial that's used, but it's one of the key forms. There was an opening ritual. The lodge meeting would take place, and then there's a closing ritual. And this particular lodge utilized swords, which everyone would have. And it involves a large degree of waving them around. Now, in a confined space of somebody's living room where there's about 10 of you all waving these swords around, it gets quite dangerous. So we didn't use swords. We used to pretend we had swords.
Wow.
And so everything else was kept constant, except the actual physical presence of a sword, which nobody actually had. But we'd all be waving the thing around as though we had one. It was absolutely hysterical.
Amazing.
Which, of course, is not really the ethos we were supposed to have at that point of the ceremonial. So you get those kind of practical considerations. So, yeah, there are swords where you've got enough space. I've been in one lodge where I wanted the guy to stick a lump of rubber on the end of his sword because there's only one guy wielding the sword. I said, stick a rubber on it, will you? Because seriously, you're gonna have someone's eye out if you don't. So sometimes you get these kind of things.
So putting aside, the way popular culture and certainly, and I'm talking about sort of the popular subculture within personal development has taken what I'm about to say. What's your true experience, knowledge, feeling, view on energy and energy work? What do you think? Do you think it's all...
Most of these people are completely deluded.
Sure, yeah.
They're superficial, intellectually weak, indulging their own narcissistic empathic value, thinking that they can control the world, heal the sick, and the energy of the divine flows through them because they are the primary channel for it. These people are totally deluded. Yeah.
So, but what, yeah, no, well, not really, because you're talking about the people who I'm talking about. Do you believe in the idea of being able to sort of transmute energy and use energy? Because there's so much kind of like more of the spiritual sort of like subsector of personal development is about this manifesting and channeling this energy. Like, what's your view? Do you think that's real?
Yeah, this is happening all the time. I mean, it was Arthur C. Clarke said any sufficiently advanced technology would look like magic.
Yeah.
The lights in this attic here are transmuting energy. They're converting the movement of electrons through a cable into heat and light, in order then that I can then receive that heat and light and utilize it. The very medium we're talking through is transmuting energy into different forms the whole time. So it does happen. Do any of these fools who are waving their hand around doing Reiki healings or tapping on energy points because they're a tapper, are any of those people doing anything? No, they're just deluding themselves. And they are using shared fantasy to convince other people to play a part in that fantasy, who then, because they now have bought into it, will now start to have all sorts of other responses, placebo responses being just one of them. There's many others, and may well report, "Oh, I can feel it too." Oh yeah. So I think I'd love to see evidence of any of this stuff.
Well, and I've watched one of your recent videos, which you kind of discussed this, and obviously that'd be a good video for other people to go and watch on your YouTube channel. But specifically, energy being propagated as a way to inoculate yourself against COVID. Now, if you could just talk, because I know that you had COVID, and
I'd like to infect every single one of those people, and let's see how well they do. Let's give them herpes as well while we're at it.
Yeah. So what were your experience? What was your experience of I shouldn't laugh when I'm talking about COVID-19, but what was your experience of COVID yourself?
Horrendous, absolutely horrendous. So I think I got lucky compared to most. My symptoms were gradual as opposed to acute onset and sudden unwellness. And it didn't really affect me in the respiratory system. It affects me now in the respiratory system. So I'm short of breath coming up the stairs. Everything I do, I'm short of breath. I'm permanently short of breath.
Right.
So that's an issue. And at some point when it's possible to see a doctor again, because you're not allowed to see a doctor unless you've got active COVID. You can't get an appointment for anything else. I need to go and get my heart checked because I'm not convinced it's my lungs. I think it may well be a cardiac. So, but the effects that I had were predominantly neurological, with extreme, mind-blowing fatigue. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. And then at some point I had a stroke of some description, where I became profoundly dyslexic and aphasic, for a period of about 40. What does that mean? I couldn't read. I could not. I would look at text and I couldn't tell you what it was. I could talk normally. My memory was bad and I lost nouns, so I wasn't able to give anyone's name. It's known as anomic aphasia, and that lasted about 48 hours. And I couldn't type for about a week. I would type away quite merrily. I could read. I got my reading comprehension back, but my output text, I would then check my email. It's like nothing there makes any sense whatsoever, or it's word salad. It's complete gibberish. The whole thing. It wasn't what I thought I was saying, and then that lasted a few days, and then came back whenever I was really, really tired. And then even now, when I'm tired, I can't read. That's really noticeable to me. I can't make sense of a sentence.
Amazing. And so
but I'm now getting better. But this is from last April of last year.
So nearly a year. What everyone's got their own view. Like, how do you think the whole thing started? Do you think it was bioengineering, or I mean,
It's
because
speculation, isn't it? Speculation.
yeah,
Who knows?
yeah,
Who knows? Would we ever know the truth anyway? Because
yeah,
everyone who reports on these things has an agenda. And
mm,
so everyone's for you see, it's not just the NLPers that are manipulating and controlling image. In
mm,
every sector, people are doing this. And so
yeah,
the reporting of all news, reporting of all data, everything the politicians do, even what the
mm,
clinicians are doing, is all subject to enormous elements of bias.
yeah,
And so what we end up hearing, what we then remember hearing, what we interpret and what we understand, and then what we output as a result of that, also
mm,
subjected to bias.
mm,
So it's all just going to be speculation forevermore.
mm,
Whether it does us any good, I don't know. The conspiracy nuts have got multiple theories on this. I was subjected to some of it when people were contacting me via Facebook back, because I had Facebook back then,
mm,
to tell me that it was either flu vaccine or it's actually a stress response.
mm.
I mean, I had one particular individual who was regaling me with, "Oh, don't be so silly. COVID's been around for years. It's just a cold. It's just that they've given a name to it now." Well, she's changed her tune since she's gone down with COVID.
Oh wow,
It's funny that. It is funny.
yeah.
I heard it all from her, and now I'm having to hear the other side of it because no one suffered as much as she has.
Mm, mm.
And
I
there's going to be a
know.
lot more that goes on too. The people who were the initial experts on the conspiracy, on what it really was, when they
Mm,
start to get it, they'll put the same diluted energy into their reporting
mm,
of their suffering that they put
mm.
into the reporting and judgment of everyone else's suffering. And they
Well,
will
I
now
mean,
make themselves the center of attention again.
it did seem, and again, it could be just my perception, but the government did seem to take things a bit more seriously when Boris was afflicted. Then all of a sudden, like actually, maybe it became a little bit more real to him. But yeah, and thereby, okay, right, I'm going to make whatever changes I'm going to make. But I know that I remember hearing it. Scientific community have said this is actually just a warm up. This can get
Well,
this
we
is
haven't even hit
COVID-19.
5% of the population infected.
Yeah,
You see, back
yeah,
when I was infected in April, it was
yeah.
0.4% of the population had been infected at that point.
So what is that in
So
numbers
less
then?
than 1%.
Right.
Now
Yeah.
we're up to about 4 to 5% infection rate. I actually haven't
Mm,
looked in the last few weeks. I don't actually know. I
yeah.
might be way off on that one. So we
Mm,
still haven't hit the majority of the population being infected.
mm, mm,
Now, obviously,
mm,
now the vaccine is out, people are hoping it doesn't hit the majority. But now,
mm,
if look at the chaos that was caused on the health services and everywhere else when it was 0.4%, it was astonishing.
mm,
Now imagine it's 20% of the population inflicted. Suddenly, you see what happens is people can be all these deniers because they don't know anyone personally who's been affected and
mm,
they've not been affected. So it's easy to go, well, this isn't happening. Yeah,
mm,
in your reality to your immediate vicinity, it's not happening, but it's
mm,
happening elsewhere. But the
mm.
narcissistic value says, my experience is the totality of the universe.
Yeah.
Now, when they get infected, they're the only one it's happening to, and they're the most
Mm,
important of it because their experience is the
mm,
whole universe.
mm,
And so, unfortunately, we're going to start to see those same assholes who are now on the other end of it, and they will make the same amount of noise. And meanwhile, everyone else who suffered through it
mm.
doesn't ever, you know what I mean? They won't go, "Oh, I'm really sorry, everyone, that I said those things and wrote those things and posted those things on Facebook. And I posted all that misleading stuff. I was wrong." No, they won't. No, they won't. They will
I
still
think
be.
they call that a pivot, don't they? When they're
Yeah.
just basically managing to leverage what they're saying into their modified new agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't
Wow.
wait till the new code trainers get it.
Yeah.
Because
Well.
what I was subjected to by those assholes,
Oh, right.
by me calling them out on their bullshit.
Right.
And then being accused of a whole bunch of stuff. If anyone wants to know on that, just look at my website.
Yeah.
They'll find it. And
Yeah.
I can't wait to see how much their new code techniques that was going to protect everyone from COVID. Come on my course, sign up now, discount,
Mm,
early booking.
mm,
You know how
mm,
much their preferred technique will save them from the ravages of COVID.
mm. Well,
But
it's
not
like
better. No.
no, no. Well, it's like people generally don't deal with rejection and failure very well, do they? And it's like as we said, that's you know we'll do almost anything to avoid having to look at our own like mess, and own up to that and own it. But because I think it's an ugly thing to do, and it's a very difficult thing to do. But I think the other side of that, if you can go through that, obviously you're going to be dealing with reality with a greater grasp and a greater degree of functionality. What do you make of, like, polarity responders and I guess stubbornness and stuff like that? Because I sort of see it as, to some extent, as a strength, but if it's used too much, then
it's a problem with the whole notion of labeling someone as a polarity responder, because ultimately, if I say you are a polarity responder, I haven't got you to agree with what I want you to agree with, and you've taken an opposite position, and I'm not willing to allow the possibility that you're right.
Right.
And so I'm going to dismiss any notion of you being right by just basically reframing everything about you as, oh, you're just a polarity responder. So therein lies the difficulty, is that this is a notion by which we can dismiss the credibility of another person's point of view by dismissing the person with a diagnostic label. And so therein lies the issue for me, is that actually it's possible that multiple realities exist, and two people with opposing versions of reality are both correct. We only have to look at, say, progressive liberal politics and conservative politics. Both are correct. Both are being done for the right reasons. And both are absolutely right. But they're not necessarily very compatible with each other. But it's necessary when we have, say, a conservative ruling class to offer progressive values in order to balance it out. If we have a progressive ruling class, it's very important to offer conservative values to balance that out. But to deride, when they start deriding each other as being the polar opposite, therefore wrong, it dismisses the possibility that actually they have merit.
Yeah.
So this is one of the difficulties when we start to look at opposing points of view. And then where do we draw the line? Because reality itself is pretty crazy. And because it's crazy, then we can start to take the craziness aspects of that, go to the fringes of absurdity of people's imaginations, where they start believing in alien abductions and all the flat earth and all that kind of nonsense, chemtrails, Bill Gates immunization program of microchips in the vaccines. They believe in nanotechnology. Those things, of course, all have elements of possibility to them because of the createdness of reality.
Yeah.
So at what point is someone got an opposing point of view, and what point is somebody utterly deluded?
It's quite seductive, because what I'd noticed is they do a lot of the conspiracy theorists' latest sort of slew of ideas, is maybe this is an old thing, where they do the appeal to authority. So they'll go, this is Rita Jones, and she is a doctor, and she trained at Stanford, and she's got all these credentials, and then you go, oh shit, she must know what she's talking about.
Yeah.
And then within 5 minutes she's going, within them there is the code 666, which is in a microchip, which they are actually in, and you're just like,
yeah.
But it's quite, it takes a level of kind of like almost like a awareness or some sort of shield to go, oh well, she has all these credentials, she must know what she's talking about, she must be telling the truth, and there can't possibly be this artifact of bare madness within her that is causing her to say this stuff. But it's worrying, isn't it? Because like it's very easy to fall to that that authority. Oh, well, she is a doctor, so she must know, or she's a professor.
I think a common problem, especially with the conspiracy nutters and people of that ilk, and the political extremists too, there's a lot of anger and hate that drives people. So people are looking for theories that confirm their pre-existing biases. Now, not all anger and hate feels bad. A lot of hate and anger is really pleasurable.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's enjoyable. And it's also a point of rapport between people, where people enjoy hating on a particular, say, ethnic group or racial group or other, in my case, NLPers, that kind of stuff. There's an enjoyment element that gets attached to that activity. And so from there, we can start to construct a story, and it feels so good. And the story also serves to justify our existing biases. And that's a very human trait.
It's that whole, to use that word I just said, it's pivoting off the whole righteous anger. Like, you've got, think of the children, you've got every right to be angry, and like grab the pitchforks, get the torches.
But I think for me, the one thing the epidemic revealed, actually several things it revealed. The first one was how unbelievably weak people are. I mean, it was a few weeks or a few days into lockdown, and the panic buying of toilet paper and the madness that erupted from there, people getting abusive and angry to shop workers and all that kind of stuff, was just extraordinary. The chaos that emerged from that was absolutely mind-blowing, when people spitting at each other and stuff like that. So the weakness, but also people's complete lack of preparedness. People don't prepare. People live in this safe bubble that nothing's ever going to go wrong, and they have nothing invested in themselves, their own inner strength, their own physical strength, their own resources. People don't put any investment in what will I do, what will I be, how will I be when something goes wrong in my life. And it will. We're all going to have relatives die. We're all going to face our own mortality. We're all going to lose things. We may face things like unemployment, economic changes we can't control. And no one seems to have any preparedness for that. And that amazes me, because I tend to invest. See, when the good times are good, people just indulge themselves. How about when the good times are good, you start investing in yourself for when they're not so good? It makes sense to me, but people don't think like this, and I don't understand that. That is actually outside of my comprehension, that people can be that blind and that weak. But the other one that I think took me by surprise was how quickly people become stupid. The conspiracy, some of the conspiracy nutters on my Facebook pages was some of the people I would least expect to go down that route of being a conspiracy nut job and a complete denier. People who are, up until that moment, I had always thought of sensible, rounded people I respected, and then they start posting these extreme things, and I was like, wow, how little it actually takes. This is just a horrible disease that is killing and disabling an unbelievable number of people. We're not having to live in a war zone with that same amount of death and pestilence happening. Because in times of war, not only do you have very high death rates, but also you have economic collapse. You might end up homeless. You might have people dying around you. You might now be somebody who's a refugee, but we don't want them here. They should go somewhere else. They're just migrants. You now could become one of those people in the caravan of refugees being hated on by everybody in the world's media. All we've got is basically a pandemic without all those additional things happening to people. And look at how so many people within the population have responded. It is astonishing to me. And that has been very disappointing, I've got to say. I say some of the people who I respected, I've lost all faith in them because of the stuff they would write and claim. And then the hating they would then put on anyone who dared wear a mask or dared, say that they actually had this mythical disease that apparently doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, they're then the people who are pointing the finger saying, "Oh, you're weak because you're believing, you're believing the narrative of the media and big pharma, that to control you by putting on a mask and stuff." So, like, just in closing, Andy. And I know you're going to hate this, and you'll probably just take me a piss off, but what advice would you give to people?
Oh God, really? Okay, delete your social media.
Because what you said about the preparedness, actually, that's really good. I think within physical training and stuff, there's this thing called GPP, which is general preparedness practice or something like I think it's GPP or something like that. So it's like, trying to create yourself as like this all-round prepared individual, with a bit of cardio, a bit of strength and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I think that's Really? So you're saying delete social media?
Today's social media, I mean, I think that's very important. Get your life back, get your mind
Yeah.
back, stop the brain rot before it's too late. Delete social media and subscribe to me on YouTube.
Yeah.
That's the only social media presence I now have. I've got a member section where I'm offering a lot of teachings and stuff. And not the entertaining stuff, it's the in-depth stuff. So that's on the subscription. New content added every week. Those are probably the two best things people can do.
Yeah. And thereby, then we're sort of like moving into the profit territory where you're obviously the answer to humanity, right?
Yeah, I need to write a manifesto. Because every prophet, modern day prophet, before they form the cult that they all get to then commit suicide in a bizarre way, I have to have a manifesto. So I'll start working on that quite soon.
Yeah. Andy, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been almost 3 hours of talking, and it's been really great, and I really appreciate your time, man.
Likewise, thank you.